Fudge, I was muted that entire time. And I reminded myself to unmute. Damn. So, I did welcome in everybody. So yeah, welcome back to another stream. Yesterday we watched a lot of meme videos, and apparently we're continuing the tradition of memeing and not unmuting the mic. So anyway, I went ahead and just listed off all the videos that we're going to watch today. Hopefully you just saw my cursor moving around. I won't list them again, just to give a little bit of a heads up. But anyway. All right. My mistake. Pro stream remove. All right. So this first video will be a lifetime of suffering and the disturbing real-life lore behind Elden Ring's Thorn Sorcerers by Infomercial. And I haven't watched anything by them before. This is a pretty new video, so let's go ahead and dive on in. And then, of course, like, the dog hops down right after I say dive on in. Okay. Here we go.
What's up with these guys?
It's a little bit loud.
Thorn Sorcerers. You see them all over the place in the game. There are two prominent camps in Liurnia where you see them with fire monks. They don't wield a lot of fire incantations, though. They use blood sorceries, which is very strange. The description of them, or at least of this sorcery that they use, Briars of Punishment, says an aberrant sorcery discovered by exiled criminals. Theirs are the sorceries most reviled by the Academy. Wounds the caster with thorns of punishment, sending a trail of blood thorns running over the ground to impale enemies from below. This sorcery can be cast repeatedly. The guilty, their eyes gouged by thorns, lived in eternal darkness. There they discovered the Blood Star. So there's some sort of alliance between these guilty, exiled, criminal sorcerers and the fire monks. You can see they have this sort of crown of thorns around their head, very reminiscent of the story of the crucifixion of Jesus, right? The crown of thorns that was placed on his head. They use these branches to cast sorceries. Not like a glintstone staff like you would see over at like Raya Lucaria or anything like that. So they're using a type of sorcery that is not approved of by the Academy, that's seen as heretical, sort of going against the grain of established practice and orthodoxy.
Right, I wonder if they're going to say why, otherwise, like, I will say it. So I'll give them a little bit longer and then chime in.
There's some really interesting real-world inspiration behind these guys.
Okay, so I'm pretty sure the reason one of the reasons they're deemed as being heretical is because, if I remember correctly, the Briar type sorceries scale off of faith rather than intelligence, and the Raya Lucarian school of glintstone sorcery is all intelligence based, so that could just be one of the reasons. And there might be some more stigmas about using blood sorceries in general, or just like blood with sorcery, but it is kind of interesting that these ones are singled out so much compared to like hexes, because obviously hexes are taboo to a degree, but it's not like we're told like the Raya Lucarians hate them specifically. How deep into stigmata do you think he'll go? I'm curious. I really have no idea. This is my first video by them. Honestly, I was a little bit worried because the channel name was Infomercial, and then when I was tagging them in my video description, it was something like Tax Enjoyer. So it sounded like such a meme content creator. So like I was afraid it was almost gonna be like a bot video or something. Okay, Bloodthorn sorceries are faith only. Thank you. Faith and arcane. Wait, do they scale with arcane? I'm gonna look it up. I mean, that sounds right because like blood uses arcane. Briar. I can't type sorceries. No, these ones just say pure faith, but of course I'm just quickly using Fextra. So, 0 arcane, just faith. That's what I thought. Okay. What? Alright, whatever. Oh, they scale with Arcane if you use the Albinorc staff, but otherwise no. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
So we're going to talk about it. But first, I want to read you a quote.
I need to figure out how to make my HUD on the mirror board go away. I don't really know how to use that program super well.
This is from a man named Robert of Avesbury in the 14th century. He said, in that same year of 1349, about Michaelmas, which is like late September, it's an old Christian holiday, over 600 men came to London from Flanders, mostly of Zealand and Holland origin. Sometimes at St. Paul's and sometimes at other points in the city, they made 2 daily public appearances wearing clothes from the thighs to the ankles, but otherwise stripped bare. Each had in his right hand a scourge with 3 tails. Each tail had a knot, and through the middle of it there were sometimes sharp nails fixed. They marched naked in a file behind the other and whipped themselves with these scourges on their naked and bleeding bodies. So what the heck is going on? Who are these guys? What does this have to do with Elden Ring?
So it never really occurred to me that Moss could be like its own suffix. So like Christmas, Michaelmas, maybe. Yeah. Michaelmas just sounds like a fake holiday, like along the lines of Festivus, by somebody who is just jealous of Christians and Christianity.
These men that Robert here is describing in the 14th century are called flagellants. These are people who devoted themselves to a very particular and somewhat disturbing religious practice during the worst pandemic that humankind has ever seen. So to understand flagellants and to understand the influence that this historical practice had on Elden Ring and some of the enemies and visual design of that game, we have to understand the Black Death.
Honestly, when he said flagellants, my brain interpreted as flatulence for a second, and I was like, what?
Also known as the Great Mortality, also simply known as the Plague. Right? Most people in that time, in the latter half of the 14th century, just referred to it as the Plague. This was the single most fatal pandemic in human history, with estimates on deaths ranging from 75 million people on the continent of Europe all the way to 200 million people. At that higher range of the estimate, that means that over half of the people who lived in Europe died in the span of less than 10 years. I think the worst of the plague was only about 6 or 7 years, but it killed almost 200 million people.
Imagine saying the worst of a plague is only 6 or 7 years. That's just wild.
It had an 80% mortality rate. So if you got the plague, it was basically over for you. And you would know pretty soon if you got the plague. You would see the signs, black fingernails, like pustules on your body, high fever. It could kill you in as little as a day. There's contemporary accounts from the time of people writing about their experiences seeing people die of the plague. Right? You wake up in the morning, you feel fine, you go to work, and by lunchtime you're in the ground, you're 6 feet under. This thing killed quick, it was nasty, it was extremely infectious, and add on top of that the fact that people didn't know about germ theory back then. They didn't actually know how diseases spread. And they weren't stupid, right? They had all sorts of theories, and they were actively trying to find out how diseases spread and how they could prevent people from getting diseases. Probably the most popular theory back then was called miasma theory, which is basically just like it's kind of almost like airborne transmission. They were close to it. They thought it had to do with air quality. Not that it was transmitted from person to person, but literally like the air around you became sick. So people would leave.
Which is kind of why I like the whole mythos behind Nito in Dark Souls 1, because not like a ton of people are familiar with like that whole miasma stuff, but yeah, definitely a much bigger concept historically speaking. Hey, Pointy Boy, welcome back to the stream. And Conspiracy, I think this is my first time seeing your name. Welcome on in. At least they killed you quite quickly, but damn, you always assumed it was a few days agony. I mean, it varied, but it could kill quickly. Yeah. And I'm not like super familiar with the bubonic plague. Yeah, and as Teen Sith says, it is still occasionally spotted today, which is kind of crazy. It wouldn't be the first time Miyazaki used religious self-punishment in the games. Father Ariandel bloodlets with his flail for the sake of Elfrida. True, and even in the Cathedral of the Deep, you have like the notched whip, and pretty much everything relating to the Deep is incidentally related to bloodletting, so definitely a big thing.
When they saw the plague coming to a city, when they saw people dying, they would leave and try and get to a place that had better air, quote unquote. So they weren't that far off, and that was actually pretty effective. Leaving a big city, going to some remote location, that could usually protect you from the plague, but not always, right? People could carry this with them, infect others.
And this is a concept that carried forward even all the way up until like the 1800s. Like people who had tuberculosis or consumption were just often prescribed going to a kind of rural area with better air quality and trying to lead better quality lives, although it didn't exactly really stop tuberculosis. You're in Australia, so it's your first time catching one live. We're watching them religiously lately. Thank you. Appreciate that very much.
The sheer fact of so much death in such a condensed period of time really reshaped European society. It reshaped class relations. It reshaped labor.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, like people didn't really have last names before the bubonic plague, but then it killed off so many of the workers that people needed to like get different occupations, and they like started moving around a lot more, and so people didn't know how to call them, and I think that's where like the concept of surnames really took off. I don't know exactly how true that is now that I think about it, so maybe I'll like look into that sometime.
Relations, right? If 200 million people die, all of a sudden there are a whole lot fewer people to work the fields and shoe the horses and, make the food. So now the price or the value of their labor is much higher because it's a lot more scarce. It's just basic supply and demand. So the Black Death actually put some people, peasants, workers, farmers, in a bit of a bargaining position with the landowners and the noble class. In medieval society, you had basically three estates or three classes. Historians break it down into the people who fight, the people who pray, and the people who work. So you had knights. These were people who were noble or people who owned land. They had an obligation to these other classes to protect them and to fight in wars to keep them safe. You had the church, who oversaw the spiritual health of the community. They were there to guide people through life, to intercede between them and God. And then you had everybody else, who were making all of the stuff that society needs to exist. Farmers, laborers, artisans, people like that. All of these three classes owed obligations to each other. And the way that people thought about it at that time was that, hey, if we all owe each other something, that's a good way to build our society. Everybody has these mutual obligations to each other to sort of keep the peace and to keep things going. But this was kind of the beginning of the end of the Middle Ages. After the Black Death, into the 15th and 16th centuries, we start to see kind of the beginnings of the early modern period. So, the rise of finance and financial tools and instruments kind of replacing this former noble class. The rise of independent bankers and merchants coming into all of this power all of the sudden, almost supplanting the noble class that used to be above them. Because, hey, what does it matter what my family name is if I've got a ton of money?
Right. I like how you started this segment off of like, what does this have to do with Thorn Sorcerers? And now we're getting like 5 to 10 minutes of just like history at this point.
And I'm buying and selling and trading stuff all over the world. We don't necessarily need this old system anymore. So over the next 2 centuries, because of the Black Death and because of a bunch of other things, you kind of saw the end of the Middle Ages. Flagellants, they appeared before the Black Death, but they really sort of came into prominence during the plague and during this huge pandemic. These are men, usually men, I think some women were involved too, but usually groups of men who would travel to town, and they would whip themselves with these instruments. Now, why on earth would somebody do that? What's the point of that? It's kind of twofold. And just a note in this photo here, these are not Klansmen. This outfit is a very old, traditional, like, Catholic outfit. You see it in Spain, especially.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like, you could look it up and, yeah.
Actually, a lot. In Europe, people wearing these hoods and white robes. This was later appropriated by the Klan in America in the 19th and 20th centuries. But this is kind of an older costume that people would wear sometimes. So what's the purpose of being a flagellant? Part of it was to share in what people called the Passion of the Christ. And that doesn't mean like Jesus had big feelings about something. The Passion is how people refer to the final days of Jesus's life as it's depicted in the Gospels. So from his entry into Jerusalem on a donkey all the way up to his death and resurrection. That's referred to as the Passion. For medieval Christians, identifying with the suffering of Jesus and sharing in the passion of Christ was important to them. They thought that they could become close to God if they experienced suffering that was similar to what Jesus experienced. And they were also trying to do something called mortification of the flesh. That basically just means denying yourself. So people did this sometimes through fasting, through the practice of like Lent, right? The 6-week period leading up to Easter, where people give things up to experience some sort of deprivation or loss. And it can extend all the way up to things like practices that we might now describe as self-harm, although the motivations are different. These people are not necessarily trying to punish themselves, and they're not even necessarily trying to like atone for their sins. That was part of it during the Black Death, during the plague. These flagellants thought that by this big public display of religious devotion and religious fervor, they could gain God's favor again. God would, turn his face to them and push the plague away and save people from this disaster that was happening. But yeah, it wasn't necessarily like these guys thought, I'm such a bad person, I need to be punished for my individual sins. They were identifying with Christ's sacrifice, right? In these stories, Jesus is punished and Jesus suffers so the rest of us don't have to. Jesus, drinks the cup of God's wrath. There's a million different ways that people describe this. Flagellants were doing sort of the same thing. Right? I am going to suffer, I am going to be punished on behalf of these other people to try and turn away this disaster and turn away God's wrath. This practice still continues to this day in certain places. I don't really have a whole lot of specifics, but I know that there are some Catholic Christians in certain parts of Southeast Asia who actually have people nail them to crosses, like nails through their palms. Needless to say, don't try that at home, right? That's a very dangerous thing to do. But we still have modern examples.
Some of this stuff kind of reminds me of like the concept of scapegoats or like effigies in terms of like what you would get in Bloodborne with the doll, or in Japan with like their version of dolls, like the Katashiro, to like offloads one's personal's like sins onto the doll, and that by like doing so they're able to cleanse and purify part of themselves. So obviously not like a one-to-one parallel, but that's just kind of what sprung to mind listening to this.
Of this religious fervor and of people trying to share in the sufferings of Christ. So that's who the Flagellants were. It's pretty obvious that From Software was at least drawing a little bit from this historical practice when they invented these blood sorceries, these Thorn Sorcerers. But this is just such a weird category in this game too, because these sorceries and these Thorn Sorcerers kind of stand at a nexus of a bunch of different things in the game. So they are related to the fire giants, but they're also related to blood and something called the Blood Star, which may or may not be the formless mother that Moog found. Thorns are also associated with death blight. When your character dies, or when another like tarnished or human character in the game gets death blighted, you see these roots and briars and thorns kind of erupt out of them. You can
True, and part of the difficulty is trying to figure out if those are meant to be equivocated to things with like the briars of sin and whatnot, and especially with the giants on the mountaintops being kind of impaled by thorns, it has made me wonder whether or not they were originally killed by Godwin, and whether or not he had thorn type powers initially, or if it's a power of Marika. Anyway.
Can get items in Stormvale that have thorns on them, and their descriptions suggest that maybe thorns have something to do with grafting. But there's also an image of there's an image, in the basement of Stormvale of Godfrey, of the first Elden Lord, who's currently, his body is alive but his soul is dead. So, maybe they're kind of related to Deathblight and Godfrey and whatever's going on with him. But it's also related to Glintstone and Raya Lucaria and spells and sorceries in general, because you can get.
And this feels like when I talk about one noodle of the lore going into the pile and then just kind of getting jumbled up and coming out in 12 other different directions here.
This item called the Staff of the Guilty. This is the the Glintstone staff, quote unquote, that these Thorn Sorcerers are using. And one thing that I never noticed before, but that I saw when I was doing some research for this, was that these staffs literally turn the blood of sacrifices into glintstone. So they serve as this kind of alchemical, transformational thing whereby people take blood and they turn it into glintstone. And glintstone is what people use to cast sorceries. Glintstone, I believe, is,
And there is a caveat to that, in that the Staff of Loss doesn't have glintstone at all, yet one is still able to conjure sorceries with it. So, if anything, it's just more like a conduit, but that is kind of arguable, like, whether or not you really do need glintstone, but, right. Hey, Kolo, welcome in. No, we're not talking about alchemy this time. And then I also want to welcome back in Methodosuri. Nice to see you again. And Teen Sith doesn't think that the Thorn Sorceries are related to Deathblight, and you determine that one pretty quickly. Yeah, I don't think so either. One thing that I've been wondering, though, in relation to Deathblight is just how much it's meant to interact with gold to a degree, because Fortisax itself is covered with Deathblight, and obviously because it's a dragon, it's not, like, dead, but it's immortal. So, yeah, I don't really know how I feel about that one. Hey, Old Augusto, welcome in. You wouldn't imagine you need glintstone, that's way too limiting. I think it just serves as like a locus of one's thoughts. Is that meant to be a hint that tree and fire are used to turn blood into glintstone? Maybe. It's possible. I don't know if you really need fire to do it, but there is a good chance, at least for Blood Glintstone, which is kind of ironic because Albrecht uses ice sorceries for the most part, I think. There's the guy with the ascetic staff with no glintstone. You don't need it for sorcery. Just doing it without glintstone makes you a weirdo. Yeah, and that's the Staff of Loss. I'm pretty sure there isn't really an ascetic staff, although you just might be describing it rather than naming it. All right.
From the night sky, right? It's pieces of stars. It's pieces of, something that is up there that was wandering around in the night sky, and people can use it for magic. But apparently, there's also a way to turn blood into glintstone. That has to do with hexes, which is where we get to Rykard and Albric and all these other people, right? These little red stones on Albric's robe are blood that was turned into glintstones, and he uses these Thorn Sorceries. Albric went to Mount Gelmir. He discovered these ancient hexes, which hexes were a category of sorcery in Dark Souls 2. They don't technically exist in Elden Ring. There's nothing called like hexes. These magma shots are just they're just magma sorceries. But there's some kind of other type of magic that exists in this world that has to do with blood and fire and thorns and death and darkness and Jesus. So that's where we're at. Not a whole lot of answers, but definitely a very kind of interesting historical reference from software with these.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's not said that Albrecht went to Mount Gelmir, so I don't remember if he even uses anything like that. I think our friend Infomercial here might just be conflating his red glintstone with the red glintstone that's found on the one snake staff, whatever it's called. I can't remember what it's called. Does a giant burning tree turn bodies into red glintstone? I don't believe so. Where did Jesus come from? Nazareth. Duh.
Thorns, these punishments. There's also this, the Shield of the Guilty. Apparently these Thorn Sorcerers, or these people who are just the guilty, venerate this maiden who died and then was reborn in the lands between. And as far as I know, this is the only reference to her, but it's still kind of interesting, right? Who is this person? Why is she important to these sorcerers? Why did these sorcerers follow the fire monks all the way down from the mountaintop of the giants? What do they have to do with Rykard? I don't have all the answers, but I just thought it was kind of interesting.
All right, so that's a little bit disappointing that there weren't as direct connections as I was hoping for. I still think this is an interesting video. I'm going to go ahead and like it. I want to see what other kind of content Infomercial has produced. That's such a weird sentence to say out loud. All right, so it doesn't look like a ton of lore stuff. Okay, I'm not going to worry too much about that. But anyway, if you guys want to give Infomercial a like and a subscribe, I'm going to go ahead and link their channel in the video into chat and move on from there. So I thought there was something else that I wanted to mention. Oh yeah, the Shield of the Guilty. Oh yeah, just the guilty in general. So this is something that I haven't dived into as much as I would like. I mean, I'm kind of familiar with a lot of the stuff with the thorns and stuff. I've looked at it a bit incidentally, but I should go back and try to take note of where all the people with like the guilty gear appear. And one thing that I did notice is when you first find the older brother D, Darian, outside of Summonwater Village at the very beginning of the game, he is standing over the corpse of a tarnished character that does have the guilty set on. So maybe there's something to be noted with that. I don't really know. I don't think so, just because like a lot of this stuff is so disparate and disconnected. I think some Guiltyhood enjoyers show up on the corpses in Fair Missoula, but I might be wrong about that one. Hey, Crunchy, yeah, so even though they're twins, he is the elder brother, Darian is, and Devin is the younger. And welcome back to stream. Guilty gear? Oh no. Okay. So that was a pretty interesting video. I'm going to go ahead and transition over into the Land of Reeds by Square Table Gaming. There might be some incidental relations with the Guilty and the Land of Reeds. At the very least, there's this weird Thorn connection to consider, which I don't think... Did Infomercial have this listed at all? I don't think he had it included, which if not, I don't necessarily blame him because it's not like super obvious. Yeah, okay. I don't see like the red thorn staff, shield, whatever it's called. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on now. All right. Turn that one on. Colo says they must admire how much preparation I put into learning the lore. At least I'm more responsible than lore tubers who just carelessly claim things and spread misinformation. I mean, to be fair, I'm certain that I've gotten things wrong in the past, but I also try to be like very open about when I'm speculating. And even going through these streams and reacting to all these videos, I still feel as though that I'm learning from others. So, yeah. And thanks for the comment. I appreciate that. Teen Sith respects Infomercial's willingness to just go, I'm not sure, which you wish more content creators would do. Yeah. Oh, yeah. So the last thing that I did want to say about Infomercial's video was, even though I enjoyed it, I wasn't necessarily on board with the whole flagellants flagellating their backs being necessarily directly tied to the guilty folk. Although I do appreciate the comparison of the idea of like scapegoating in a certain sense, kind of potentially being related to what the Thorn Sorcerers are doing. And that might be something worth considering more in the future for me. All right. The Land of Reeds by Square Table Gaming.
Up to this point, our Elden Lore series has focused mainly on characters, monsters, and factions within the Lands Between. Since the early days of our channel, there's one topic that seems to pop up from time to time in our comments section, but we felt it fell a bit outside of what we usually cover. Today I'm going to give these commenters what they've been asking for, and step a bit outside of my comfort zone, by discussing the history and possible lore of not a person or a creature, but a land. The Land of Reeds is where the...
So who thinks that we could potentially be going to the Land of Reeds with the DLC? Part of the reason why I mentioned that is obviously with the promo image, we're like in a field which almost looks like wheat, or it could just be reeds. No way.
The samurai of Elden Ring hail from, and while there isn't too much information given on this mysterious place just outside of the Lands Between, we will be exploring what we can know, and the possible connection between the Land of Reeds and another From Software property. Welcome to the Elden Lore series, where we dive into the lore and theories behind the various enemies and factions throughout Elden Ring. If this is your first time finding the channel, welcome. We hope you enjoy this video. With over 90 episodes in our playlist, we hope you'll be able to find what you're looking for. And if not, feel free to comment with the topics you'd like to know more about. While you're at it, please...
Aaron Weiss says, you think the Land of Reeds won't be somewhere we go, as we already had a whole game set in a fantasy Japan? Well, we've got 4 whole games set in a medieval fantasy world, so why not another fantasy Japan to add to the list? If we didn't get Bloody Londor, then we aren't going to get the Bloody Land of Reeds. Joke's on you. We discovered that... yeah, I guess maybe I should just show it off. I don't think I actually have it labeled, though. Anyway... In Stormvale Castle, there is... And this also appears in the Round Table Hold. The real one. There is like a rug type thing, which appears with this interesting crest on it, which looked vaguely familiar to me, but I couldn't quite remember. But then Mindspatch happened to like post a picture of the Lothric Knight Sword that's like on in the church right before you go fight Midir in Dark Souls 3. And I was like, wait a second. I recognize that, so I did like the whole Leonardo DiCaprio meme thing of pointing. And this is it. So it's on the Discord for anybody who's curious about that. So yeah, I don't have like the Dark Souls 3 reference image ready, I don't think. Actually, maybe I do. Midir. This might take me a hot minute to find. Starting soon, guys. All right, hold on. I guess I killed Midir early here then. Okay, so I probably didn't stop long enough to like look at it there. I know it took me a hot minute to get to Midir and kill him. So I guess I must have waited to do Midir after Gale. Because I kind of hate the Midir fight. Okay, that was it. 1 second. Hey, okay. So this is the sigil which appears in Lothric. Well, sorry, the Ringed City, obviously. And why did I close this? This is stupid. Picture crest. And here it is here. So let's go do this. Wow. Alright. So anyway, my point is, we really are going to get the Londor DLC that we've all been waiting for. The Land of Reeds is in the Mortal Realm, and we don't usually go to mortal lands besides the Undead Asylum. To be fair, even the lands between seems like a mortal realm, because we don't actually go to the Spirit Realm. Although, of course, I know most people believe that we'll be visiting the Spirit Realm in the DLC. Okay, I'll try to like check out his backlog later if I remember. I think it was just the Eastern Lands and Dark Souls 1 as for like the Japanologue. Well said. Welcome back to the stream, Nectarine. Alright, going back to Square Table Gaming.
Please consider subscribing to the channel. Every subscription helps us grow as a community. You can also feel free to check out our Discord if you want to delve deeper into Elden Ring's story with other FromSoft fans. Whether you subscribe or not, thanks again for checking out our content, and with that said, let's get back to the topic at hand. If you choose to start the game as a samurai, you begin with the Land of Reed's armor. This armor piece gives us some of the little background available when it comes to this enigmatic continent outside of the lands between. Armor made from strips of iron fastened together, worn by the warriors of the Land of Reeds. The grimy outer mantle is made from withered reeds from the warrior's birthplace. Perhaps its comforts extend to nostalgic thoughts of home. The altered version of this armor adds, the Land of Reeds has long been locked in a miserable civil war, during which time it has remained alienated from the cultures of its neighbors. Little wonder that the entire nation has succumbed to the blood-soaked madness, or so it has been said. From here we learn 3 things. First, the samurai of the Land of Reeds don armor made from their homeland's namesake. Second, that this homeland stayed locked off from other islands, embroiled in a civil war that seems to mirror Japan's Sengoku period, when social upheavals and civil wars were commonplace. And third, that the entire nation is said to have succumbed to blood-soaked madness. The third point is interesting, given that one of the Land of Reed's most decorated warriors, Okina, has found himself in the service of the Lord of Blood, Mohg. Okina himself does not teach us much about the Land of Reeds outside of his penchant for blood. The Land of Reeds is described as succumbing to blood-soaked madness, and Okina himself dedicated his life completely to the mastery of his blade, to the point where he would leave his disciples and his homeland behind and become a demon of a swordsman. His sword, Rivers of Blood, tells us, when Mohg, the Lord of Blood, first felt Okina's sword and madness upon his flesh, he had a proposal: to offer Okina the life of a demon, whose thirst would never go unsated.
And I've wondered whether or not this means that this is kind of the first exposure that Mohg may have had to the Formless Mother, or just the madness in the blood in general, because we don't know what circumstances they managed to meet under. Did Okina travel underground? It's possible. If so, I guess I would imagine more omen corpses and whatnot. Or did he meet Moog after Moog had already kind of established the Mogwin Dynasty Mausoleum? It seems very plausible, so I think it's just a little bit open to interpretation. And then the other thing that I have definitely wondered is whether or not the madness in the blood is supposed to be separate from Moog entirely, and if it's just a property of constantly slaying people and being blood-soaked, which is why the Rivers of Blood became the way that it is, or the reason that Eleonora's pole blade became the way that it is. And to be fair, we don't exactly have the exact same thing going on with the Murray Executioner sword, so maybe that isn't quite the case, although maybe the whole madness was endemic to the land of reeds to begin with, and that might be part of why these weapons specifically get coated in blood flame. Sure is the Formless Mother, maybe. Don't the Japanese believe there's a tie between personality and blood type? Might have something to do with that since the Rivers of Blood is Okina's blood? Yes and no. I mean, it's kind of like the equivalent of astrology. Some people place a lot of stock in it, but it's not as though everybody does. And I think most people in Japan have type A blood, and type O is the most rare there, which is why type O is considered like a warrior blood, and like type A is farmer, and I'm not too deep into the details on that one. Astrology's real in this game, though. I just got like Kaiba destroyed right now. Maybe they met through blood, like Okina was killing so much, Moog could communicate through it. Maybe, and it is very interesting that Moog can like be manifest within the blood of Mikola, or how the Sanguine Nobles can kind of congeal out of pools of blood into more corporeal forms, with like a caveat of the consecrated snowfield Sanguine Noble that invades us is actually like a tarnished model. And yeah, that it's really weird to me that we have a fake Sanguine Noble and kind of pseudo illusory Sanguine Nobles along the lines of Black Knife Assassins. I don't exactly know what to make of that.
Presumably, this is when Moog granted the Rivers of Blood the Corpse Piler ability, much in the same way he granted Eleanor's pole blade the Pole Blade Dance.
And if I remember correctly, there is an Ash of War that is exactly the same as Corpse Piler, but obviously it doesn't have like the blood extensions. I forget what it's called though. Like Master Flurry or something like that?
There is another blood-related Ash of War that is tied directly to the Land of Reeds. Seppuku is a forbidden technique used by swordsmen from the Land of Reeds. Plunge the blade into your stomach to stain it with blood. Increases attack power and improves ability to inflict blood loss. So it would seem the rumors of the Land of Reeds being overtaken by blood-soaked madness are at least partially true, if its swordsmen literally use their own blood to fight their enemies. There is a second set of armor related to the Land of Reeds, known as the White Reed set. This set is described as armor of the White Reeds, fashioned from banded iron plates, worn by the Inaba, head disciples of the great swordsman Okina. The Inaba traveled in pursuit of not only the master who abandoned them, but also proper deaths, won honorably through hard-fought combat. To be a White Reed is to seek death, fitting for the Inaba, who desired nothing more than to die by the sword.
And just a couple of notes about that. In the East, white is typically the color associated with funerals, so it is fitting that their armor would be dyed white. So it's supposed to be like kind of a representative of funerary garb. And to be a White Reed is to seek death. So they're all kind of trying to find Okina to either kill him in battle and release him from his like pseudo curse, or to be killed in battle. So in some ways, this is kind of reminiscent of like Henrik from Bloodborne, although the Henrik like English translation is a little bit less clear about how that works, and it is a lot more intuitive with this one. And there'll be more to say about this, I'm sure. What's the gold crest in the plate? It is just a kind of thing that is particular to the Land of Reed stuff. I have wondered whether or not it's supposed to be similar to the design on the cloak of the veteran's armor, but this seems fairly unique. Hey Darth Goss, welcome into the stream. And then Errant Vice said, you think they just can't code an enemy to invade? That's not entirely true, but although I know what you're talking about. Like in the Ring City, Knight Leto is an NPC invader, but Silver Knights are already an enemy in the game. So they're able to code some enemies to invade because you do have the random Crucible Knight, which can invade you at the body of Rykard and Tanith in Volcano Manor. But the interesting thing that I noticed about that invasion is that it's not actually a true invasion because you're able to open the menu and still like quick travel. So it doesn't seem like you're in proper combat initially. And anytime you get invaded elsewhere, you can't really open the menu to like fast travel or summon Torrent. So something is going on with that weird Crucible Knight. So you might be half right, but I don't know.
This armor worn by the students of Okina adds more context to the mindset of warriors from the Land of Reeds. In their mind, a good death, hard won through combat, is more important than anything else. Whether this lesson was instilled in them by Okina himself, or if it is a widespread belief of those living in the Land of Reeds, is unknown, but we're inclined to believe it's a fairly common practice. This would explain why the civil wars are unending. If warriors believe the ultimate honor is to fall in battle, then battle becomes a way of life. It's also worth noting that Yura seems to hail from the Land of Reeds, as he's described as a Ronin, or a wandering samurai, and wields an impossibly long anime katana, the Nagakiba. It is implied he once carried Eleanor's polearm as well, and gifted it to her in their travels. This explains why a weapon originating from the Land of Reeds would be wielded by a Drake Knight. Unfortunately, his armor does not give us any additional insight into his homeland, but he certainly embodies the idea of a Ronin, as he seems to have pieced together armor from the lands between and incorporated it into his Land of Reeds looking set.
Yeah, I don't entirely know about the Eleanor Poleblade connection, although it is very plausible. I'll give them that. And just for reference, like his iron casa, like a casa is kind of an Eastern style hat. So there is definitely reason to associate Yura to the East, especially because Eleanor's Poleblade is a kind of weapon from the Lands of Reeds. So yeah, if he did give her that weapon, that is. So I thought there was something else that I was going to say, but I'm blanking. Oh, right. And like Nagakiba just means like long fang, essentially, so.
The iron casa is also distinctively Eastern when compared to the other headpieces found throughout Elden Ring. This is everything we can possibly know about the Land of Reeds through in-game descriptions, but fans of FromSoft titles have likely gathered that the way this country is described seems to share theming and elements with another game in the Soulsborne series.
I'm a little bit surprised he didn't mention the round thorn shield or whatever it's called, which is also related to the Land of Reeds. Maybe he did and I forgot. Yeah, Naga is like short for it. Well, not like short, but like Nagai. Nagai. So I'll just do it. So this is the character for long, Nagai, and so right here is Naga. So Nagakiba is just like long fang or like long tooth.
Sekiro.
And I suppose I should mention, like, I'm pretty sure that the Nagakiba doesn't have kanji associated with it, so they could potentially try to make it like a play on words a different way, although... Oh, no, I'm right. Okay, so it does have kanji. It's not like the Chikage. Alright, so these are the kanji which show up in the Nagakiba, and that was the one that I just showed you, Naga for Nagai. And then Kiba is tooth. Oh, I guess I should show, like, tusk fang. And then... Oh, it's showing me like the other form of Nagai. Anyway.
Myself have always been of the opinion that Elden Ring exists in its own universe, strictly outside of every other FromSoft title. In fact, I recalled Miyazaki saying so himself, and often see others in the community stating the same thing. However, after digging into this, I came to realize I've been living a lie. The most popular sources when people say that Miyazaki has clearly stated that Elden Ring exists as its own piece of media, unconnected, are from his 2019 IGN interviews. I have read these interviews multiple times and can find no evidence of this being said. When referring to mimics, he does say, "You probably won't find mimics in that exact same form. It's a different world to Dark Souls," and after releasing the Dark Souls 3 DLC, he said he intended to stop working on Dark Souls for a while. The most surprising thing I found while researching this claim is that everything Miyazaki has said about Elden Ring's disconnection to other FromSoft games has only strictly referred to Dark Souls.
No,
This
don't do
opens
it.
the possibility that the Land of Reeds is nothing more than another name for Ashina, the land of Sekiro.
Oh no. No, why? Why you gonna do it like that, man? So Ashina is like legitimately supposed to be Japan. So this DLC is gonna be interesting where we go next.
While I still believe that the universe of Elden Ring is its own thing entirely with no strict connections to other games, it's hard to ignore all of the parallels between the Land of Reeds and Ashina. The Eastern influence is apparent, and every weapon forged in the Land of Reeds utilizes a katana blade, just as the most powerful in Ashina do. Even the idea of a land of never-ending civil war could be paralleled with Sekiro, as it also takes place in a fictionalized version of Sengoku-era Japan. This can be taken a step further when looking at the literal translation of the word Ashina, common reed. So it is that the land of the Ashina family could be literally translated as the land of reeds.
Yeah, but I feel like that should be clearly taken as more of a an Easter egg or reference than anything literally meant. I feel a little bit bad that they're coming off so strongly that they could be connected, when I feel like it's definitely more on a metaphorical level.
While all of this could be Miyazaki giving us strong nods back to his previous work, as he often does throughout his games, the parallels between the Land of Reeds and Sekiro are particularly strong, and I can't fault or disprove anyone for thinking they are referring to the same place intentionally, especially when the comments made by Miyazaki himself do not seem to extend beyond the Dark Souls series specifically.
Yeah, I feel like that claim right there is just, that's not one that I would stick with, to say the least. Aaron Weiss says, Ashina was a real place in Japan too. It was a minor dominion that was absorbed by the Takeda? You mean like Takeda clan? And the central ministry was also a real historical faction. Yes, and so obviously like the Shugendo type Senpo monks, I think, are a bit more fictionalized. It's very clearly meant to be like actual Japan in, well, actual fictionalized Japan in Sekiro. So, right. Otter gods are great ones, confirmed. I guess yeah, I feel like when you make claims like this, you just kind of end up shooting yourself in the foot in unintended ways or unexpected ways, because if you want to go this route, then you're opening up the can of worms to say like the divine Sakura dragon is also canonically within Elden Ring, I guess, sort of, or incidentally. And that isn't to say that it couldn't be, but then you really start like having to reconcile like a lot of these differences. Is the Sakura essentially like a version of an Erdtree? It's just a yikes.
So what did you think of our breakdown of the lore and theories behind the Land of Reeds? Does this fictionalized Eastern country only exist so that Miyazaki can include katanas in a more Western-centric feudal world? Have we been to the Land of Reeds before when we...
I believe so, and this isn't necessarily just like a FromSoft limited thing. This happens all the time in Japanese games where they make these kind of weird self-referential nods to Japan by like making an Eastern country analog that kind of exists as a pseudo Japan in their games. So one that pops up off the top of my head is Wutai in Final Fantasy VII. Like Yuffie is a ninja. I mean, very clear there. I think like Terranigma also makes. Does Terranigma actually use the real world map? Sort of. I think it does. So maybe that's not the best example. But anyway, yeah, it just comes up quite a bit. Final Fantasy XIV has Kugane. I don't exactly know what Kugane is. Is that like a weapon? Or do you mean like Kogane? Like, is that steel? I don't remember. Wutai is like Vietnam, Japan, kind of. Yeah, I mean, it's not exactly the same, but I mean, definitely references. It's the name of a major city. Oh, okay, okay. Oh, the region is called Higanbana. So is it like... Is this a real city? Because I'm like, Higanbana, that just makes it sound kind of fake. Hey guys, I'm American. Can you tell by my excellent knowledge of geography? I almost said geometry. I'm an idiot. All right. It's kind of what I thought. I'm assuming I'm going to type in region because like Higan is a type of flower. Higanbana is a flower. So yeah, I guess now that I'm talking about Higan, for people who are like into Eastern games and stuff, or just like Eastern pieces of fiction, sometimes you'll get references to like flowers blooming, whether or not they're like red flowers or flowers on the other shore, things along those lines. They could be a reference to the red spider lily, which is kind of associated with death. So that's kind of what Higan is, like Higanbana. Hana is flower, but when it gets conglomerated into a compound word, you voice the H sound, so it becomes Higanbana. So, Higanbana. Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead and finish out the video.
Explored the world of Sekiro. Did the bloodshed of his homeland make Okina more susceptible to the power of Mohg? Would the wolf have a hard time making his way through the lands between? We are sincerely looking forward to all the comments and conversations that could take place under this video. We want to hear your thoughts. And if you can find the elusive true source of Miyazaki stating that Elden Ring exists in its own separate universe, I'd love to see it so I could feel a little less crazy.
No, that wasn't an Australian accent. That's like my super exaggerated southern accent. Or like, if you've seen Inglourious Bastards, Buongiorno, like that kind of stuff. Anyway, so yeah, earlier in the chat, I think it was it Elda Gusto? Somebody had said the items found in Caelid, and they'd reference like the cross Naginata, which is a good weapon to bring up. Okay, so it's Aaron Weiss. The cross Naginata, the two magic katanas, the wakizashi, and the regular samurai armor are all found in Caelid. Yeah, and that is a good point, because like the cross Naginata is definitely an Eastern-inspired weapon. Maybe enough so that you could probably argue that it should be affiliated with the Land of Reeds, but right. I'm kind of really surprised that Square Table Gaming made this video quite like phrasing things so strongly this way. Obviously they did leave it a bit open, but they've been very cautious in the past. So this one's kind of more surprising than anything else. Arrivederci. Yeah, I am a little bit Kansai man confirmed. Australia is extra southern, you got me there.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss out on any of our lore dives. We look forward to seeing you again for more Elden lore.
Right, and I was going to talk about Seppuku and Inaba. So this is the link to the video if you guys liked it. Nah, I can't do it. I want to like it because I do like their channel, but I don't want to encourage this too much more. So, okay. I want to look at some screenshots that I have saved. Because this stuff isn't like super important, but I think it's just still kind of neat. But if you go to the Spirit Culling Cave in the mountaintops, you can find Inaba being summoned by the snails there. And when you look at its face, Inaba's right eye is kind of scarred, so I'm assuming like they're wall-eyed because this eye is no longer functional. But then their left eye still has the reddish hue of one who is under like the bloodlust effect of the Moog followers, which is kind of interesting. So this one should be a little bit closer up. Yeah. So it's got the whole red eye going on. It's a little bit cross-eyed too, now that I look at it this closely. And so I do wonder if this Inaba was killed by Okina. So we do find Okina up by the one Church of America up there, or whatever it's called. What is that one called? It's not too important. So anyway, you guys were like wondering about the sigil. It's kind of like this wreath-looking motif. So when you do fight Inaba, he does use seppuku. So there is the whole kind of a continuity of Eastern warrior using seppuku. He does use the wakizashi in the one hand, if I remember correctly, and the katana on the other, which does go to show like you can power stance them, which is one detail that I really enjoyed about being able to power stance these two weapons. However, I do really wish there was a kind of OP Ash of War for daggers, specifically just to make it like worthwhile using. Because really the only reason you would ever want to use the wakizashi over another katana is just due to weight differences, which is extremely negligible to say the least. And you're going to lose out on a lot of range. But anyway, that's not too important. Okay, so the Naginata is a weapon of the Land of Reeds, known for its ability to be wielded as a spear, while still being capable of performing slashing attacks. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that would probably be something that I like read maybe once or twice and just never really thought about again. I do know that it was kind of good for PvP, though. Oh, you can put parry on the dagger, that's true. They got rid of the hold parry? Yeah, that's a fair one. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on into what makes these perfumers so depraved by the Lore Hunter.
Why, hello there. Welcome to Elden Ring Encyclopedia, where I go through every item in Elden Ring A through Z to get into the details of the story and lore of Elden Ring. Last time I talked about the Academy Scroll and getting into Rhea Lucaria. In this video, we are switching gears and discussing the item Acid Spray Mist, and through it, the Depraved Perfumers and what makes them so rotten. Let's get into it. First, a little history. I'll be talking more about the other flavors of Perfumer in future videos, but you cannot properly discuss Depraved Perfumers and what sets them apart without understanding the history of the Perfumers and their role in the lands between. If you watch this video and want a more in-depth analysis of the Perfumers and their history, Hawkshaw has a video about the Perfumers that generally aligns with my interpretation and lays out a compelling tale. You can find it in the description below. But back to the history.
It's pretty nice to do.
The Perfumerhood tells us that in times past, the role of Perfumer was much respected, a blessed apothecary in the eyes of the many. The Perfumer robe expands upon this, saying that the thick front apron embroidered with a depiction of the Erd tree is proof of mastery of the apothecarial arts, and its weight symbol.
Isn't it kind of funny and a little bit ridiculous how many different depictions of the Erd tree we really have? We've got this one, we've got that one, we've got the so-called coniferous Erd tree like on the Colosseum doors. There's a lot to list. I'll just stop for now.
symbolizes the onus of both pride and responsibility. The Perfumers were skilled apothecaries who practiced restorative arts with aromatics. They held high station in the capital city, evidenced by the Erdsteel dagger they wield, a weapon carried by the Erd Tree royalty according to its description. The perfume bottle tells us that the art of perfuming was once jealously guarded in the capital. The art of perfuming, with its ability to heal body and mind, was valuable enough to exclusively hold, and also potent enough that the Golden Order would want to keep the practice guarded. However, the Shattering War would affect everything and everyone, and the Perfumers were no exception. The Perfumer Hood explains that after entering the battlefields of the Shattering, they traded their aromatics for poisons and explosives. Not only did perfuming change from an art of healing to an art of war, but as war spread across the lands between, so did the art of perfuming, and the perfume bottle tells us that the art became widely practiced throughout the lands between.
Yeah, and so I really do enjoy the kind of extra depth perfume gives to the game in comparison to the previous titles, like the Dark Souls ones, in that they're kind of used for buffing, and they're also able to be used for offense, even though they're consumables, but they actually feel pretty effective at what they set out to do, which a lot of the consumables in FromSoft games tend to be fairly negligible. When you find a perfumer out in the wild, you're like, oh man, here we go again.
Now we have the general history of perfumers as apothecarial healers and later battlefield commanders, but before we discuss how the depraved perfumers fit into all of this, we have to talk about the Omen Killers. This bluntly named group started with a famous perfumer named Rollo. Omen Killer Rollo's ashes state that Rollo imbibed a physic to rid himself of emotion, thus enabling him to enact his nightmarish labor, hunting the Omen. The Omen Killer robes tell us more about the Omen Killers, explaining that the robe's thick apron is worn in remembrance of Rollo, the progenitor of the Omen Killers and a perfumer of antiquity. We will talk about the Omen Killers more in future videos, but what we need to remember for now is that the Omen Killers slaughter Omen, people born with accursed blood who grow horns. And it's not just omens, they hunt down all creatures outside the grace of the Golden Order. I would say that even more than the military perfumers of the Shattering, the Omen Killers have very much strayed from the blessed apothecary roots they came from. So who are the depraved perfumers then? The Depraved Perfumer robe says, these heresy-inclined perfumers imbibe their own spices to alter body and mind. Their slow descent into self-destruction is what earned them their name. And Depraved Perfumer Carmon's ashes state that depraved perfumers practice their art for themselves alone. Depraved means to act in a morally corrupt or perverse way. At first, I interpreted the Depraved Perfumers as being morally corrupt because they are selfish by practicing their arts for themselves. That their self-destruction that earned them their name is due to the dangerous and harmful techniques they practice. Basically, they're the evil, selfish perfumers. Being differentiated as depraved implies to me that the other perfumers are not depraved, that they're by comparison morally upstanding and virtuous. But are they really? The military perfumers practice the spark aromatic technique, which sprays fire. This is a big no-no for the Golden Order, and the spark aromatic item description explains that, though
Yeah, guys, don't get high on your own supply. Getting zooted on your own spice, not even once. You missed when they were just called pyromancies? Well, I mean, there still are kind of some pyromancies in the game, to be fair. So, yeah, I really like the spark aromatics just because they make even what would normally be like a trash mob kind of threatening. And, yeah, I don't know. They're just kind of a cool, different dynamic from a kind of, I don't want to say like a franchise, but like a studio that in some ways is getting a little bit stale with its approach to combat. And obviously Elden Ring, it facilitates a hell of a lot more freedom than all of the other games, but it is also fairly formulaic in many ways. It's neat.
fire was prohibited to those who served the Erd Tree, This rule was forgotten as the war drew ever on. So even though they started practicing prohibited fire techniques in an order known to exile those who even saw visions of fire, they were not called depraved and they let it slide. The Omen Killers are genocidal butchers whose founder developed a physic to rid himself of emotions in order to do it, and yet these actions that I would certainly classify as immoral are not described as such. At this point, we should examine the self-destructive techniques of the depraved perfumers. Maybe they're so bad that it explains what makes them depraved in comparison. The cookbooks of the depraved perfumers state that they contain perilous techniques no ordinary physician would attempt. Acid spray mist is one such technique, and it says, "Forbidden art of the depraved perfumers, craftable with a perfume bottle. Use FP to release an acidic mist from the user's mouth, damaging armaments and temporarily lowering attack power. Perfumed powder is held in the mouth to dissolve before being expelled. It was once a restorative art, or so it is said." Poison spray mist is described similarly, but instead...
So Aaron Weiss brings up a good comment in that, isn't that why they removed the fire effect from Morgott turning his staff into a sword in the cutscene in 1.3? So the fact that they're talking about is just like they probably wanted to make Morgott not use fire because it's anathema to the Erd Tree. And I never really thought about it from that angle. I just kind of took it at face value that that just might not have been the direction that they wanted to go in, and I didn't really think too much about it. But if so, that can make sense. Although Morgott still does use like blood flame attacks, I'm pretty confident. Or at least his weapon art definitely does. Maybe that'll be worth comparing. Does he use blood flame in his fight? I usually kind of end phase 2 pretty quickly, like after his cursed blood comes out, so I would need to like double check my footage.
Instead, poisons the enemy. They are both restorative arts repurposed to do harm, but that is no different really than the perfumers of the Shattering creating poisons and explosives. Another technique of the depraved perfumers is called Blood Boil Aromatic. Forbidden art of depraved perfumers, craftable with a perfume bottle. Uses FP to enter a temporary state of fervor, raising maximum attack power and stamina while also increasing damage received. Even upon the battlefield, do you fear being wounded? Take a good look, your limbs are frozen stiff.
So I do really like the Blood Boil Aromatic, and I think that's supposed to thematically tie into the Omen Killers, but I digress. Tyler says it's not technically Blood Flame, it doesn't do consistent bleed buildup after their attacks. Interesting, and that kind of makes sense. Huh. I'll need to look into that a bit more. Thanks for bringing that to my attention. Them changing that effects makes you wonder why they haven't fixed the black flames on EG and other such things. I mean, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't even realize.
Technique is admittedly pretty self-destructive, turning depraved perfumers into berserkers on the battlefield. And yet, is it really depraved compared to the uplifting aromatic of the military perfumers? This aromatic has an extremely potent morale-raising effect that makes those accustomed to it fearless in the face of death. It was this influence that made the perfumers exceptional commanders. The military perfumers as commanders used this to boost the morale of their soldiers so that they would fearlessly charge into the face of death, which honestly feels worse to me than turning just yourself into a berserker. The final depraved perfumer technique is Iron Jar Aromatic, forbidden art of depraved perfumers, craftable with a perfume bottle, uses FP to temporarily turn body to steel, boosting poise, resistances, and damage negation at the expense of mobility and vulnerability to lightning. An art that requires fragments of hunted noble jars. Depraved perfumers are plainly in league with jar poachers. I won't argue that anyone who would consider harming Jar Baron or Alexander to turn into iron for a minute is not a monster, and the depraved perfumers being in league with jar poachers is not a good look. However, the Omen Killer's sole purpose is genocidal slaughter. So by my standards, all of these folks smell pretty depraved, but what makes these perfumers depraved according to the perspective of these item descriptions? I think it is less about the fact that they practice their art for themselves, and more about the fact that they don't practice the art of perfuming for the Golden Order.
Agree.
The military perfumers go to war for the Golden Order, and the Omen Killers genocide those rejected by the Golden Order. The Depraved perfumers, however, are described as heresy inclined by their set, and I think that is putting it a little mildly. Their robe is different from that of the other perfumers, and the robe's item description explains that the embroidery on the apron is itself a curse upon the Erd Tree. Are you really just heresy inclined when your symbol is a curse upon the holy symbol of the Golden Order? Seems more like a heresy motivated kind of situation. In either case, they are considered depraved from a pro-Golden Order perspective, which is present in these item descriptions. And according to this perspective, being morally corrupt and perverse pretty much begins and ends with if someone supports the Golden Order. In this light, the Depraved Perfumer robe stating that their slow descent into self-destruction is what earned them their name is moral self-destruction in a system where right is adhering to the Golden Order and wrong is not adhering to it. They won't follow the rules of the Golden Order, and they're even against it based on their choice of embroidery, and therefore they are depraved. I think this is reinforced by where we find the greatest concentration of them in the game, the Shaded Castle. The former ruler of this castle, with the very rhymey name Malay Murray, had a family history of being ill, and according to the Murray robe, it is little wonder that Malay Murray would be so beguiled by the beautiful and fierce goddess who was born into rot.
Hey, Drew
This is,
Wing,
of
welcome
course,
back in.
Melania, who in the Shattering is not on the side of the Golden Order and the Erd Tree, but on the side of Mikola and the Halig Tree. This secondary effect of this is that a love of rot also provides a place filled with key ingredients for many perfuming techniques, especially those of the Depraved perfumers, such as the Miranda plant. You'd also think that although the perfumers rely on plants for their art, that their heresy-inclined nature would lead at least one of them to Rykard in the Volcano Manor, and you'd be right. We find Depraved perfumer Carmon's ashes sealed away in the Volcano Manor. Carmon was a notably formidable perfumer whose strength rivaled that of heroes, and it is said that he was in search of a secret physic of revivification.
And that line has always been kind of interesting to me because with spirits and whatnot being immortal with the Golden Order, what need would there really be for revivication? Potentially just to revivify bodies or bring spirits back into bodies? I don't know. So if Carmon was killed, we should question when he was killed and why he was looking for this kind of a legendary substance to begin with. Could be necromancy, maybe. It's definitely a double helix type design, which is interesting, yes. Nectarine asked, is the design on the apron the serpent eating the Erd Tree? I was going to try to wait for the lore hunter to make their claim here, but to give a little bit of a spoiler alert answer, yes.
Supposedly unkillable, Rykard not only aligns with Carmon's morals, but also his goals, and the Volcano Manor is a sensible place to explore revivification. So what happened to Carmon? The spirit ashes imply that he never accomplished his goal. I think the answer is in his ashes. According to the description, his strength rivaled that of heroes. And as we learn from Tanith,
if you follow this heroic path, one day the Lord will see you. The Lord's visits with our champions are always a spectacle.
And according to Rykard's Rankard spell, the Lord granted heroes an audience, whereupon they were welcomed by the Maw of the Great Serpent, and within the serpent's bowels, they became the Lord's kin. It is likely that Carmon, in his pursuit to create a physic of revivification, sought an audience with Rykard and met his end in Rykard's tummy.
Honestly, I really like that idea, even if I don't know how true it is. I'm kind of against it, just because we don't really have that kind of explicit confirmation that I particularly enjoy, but this is a kind of realm of cool headcanon that I will support.
And there you have it, the story of the Depraved Perfumers and what made them so depraved in the eyes of the Golden Order.
Damn it. I was really hoping that the lore hunter would give us the final nail in the coffin, but it looks like he may have missed it. So, okay. In Volcano Manor, there is the throne with the snake that still has the egg on its head, like the mage, right before warping into Rykard. And if you get a good look at the banner here, this is actually the exact same banner which appears on the Depraved Perfumers. This isn't like the best example of it because it's a little bit difficult to see. Do I have a better footage of it or anything like that? Maybe not. Let me actually look at my footage folder. I don't think so. Maybe I'll need to pull up the actual like concept art, but it should make it a little bit clearer. But based on like Nectarine's question earlier, we do have the two coiled serpents, and they show up on this banner as well. Just give me one more moment here. So, right, with the Depraved Perfumers most likely being affiliated with Rykard, I could imagine the Golden Order affiliated folk being like, hey, those guys are doing the bad stuff, therefore they shouldn't really count, and all of that. Maybe it's not in here. Is this it? Okay, yeah, so this is a little bit better. So this is like the official concept art of the Rykard throne room, and you can see the dually twirled snakes. So this isn't actually, I don't think it's like a one-to-one thing with the Depraved Perfumer set, now that I like look at it directly. But at the very least, there might have been something else similar enough to it. Right, let me look at one more thing, and then I'll like move on. Is this it? No. Okay, here we go. So yeah, it is a little bit different after all, but I'm pretty confident the Depraved Perfumers are supposed to be like Rykard affiliated. Okay. And if they are like Rykard affiliated, it just makes the Golden Order hatred of them even more self-apparent. Hey Stella, nice to see you again. That room was Rykard's throne room when he was still a human? Most likely, yes.
I really enjoyed this dive into their story, and I always enjoy examining the inherent perspective found in many item descriptions and seeing what more we can learn about the world through better understanding this perspective. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and if you want more Elden Ring story and lore content, then subscribe to The Lore Hunter. I also want to plug that I do have a Patreon, and one of the nice advantages of being a patron is that all patrons get access to a patron-only RSS feed where I upload audio versions of my videos. I know I listen to videos as often as I watch them, and if you do as well, then it might be nice to have them on your podcast player of choice. Thanks for watching.
It's kind of an interesting idea about like making an audio version first. Would you guys be interested if I did something like that as well? Although maybe not like make it patron limited, or maybe I should like for like the lowest tier member of channel server like supporter that I have. I don't know. Just something I'd never thought about before. So anyway, yeah, that was a good video by the Lore Hunter. I'm going to go ahead and paste it into the chat. And okay, so next we have another video by the Lore Hunter about the biggest changes to item descriptions in the network test files and the full release. So I have like very, very limited knowledge about this, so should probably learn a lot with this video, perhaps.
Why, hello there. Back in November, Elden Ring got a closed network test, which I will refer to as the CNT, and with it, some item descriptions that were the basis for so much speculation leading up to release.
So El Gusto says, don't audio versions kill the algorithm? Yes, I mean, honestly, my streams have been killing my algorithm, so it doesn't matter. But I was just going to do it like off the cuff and not really upload it onto YouTube and just like give you guys the files directly maybe. But good question. An Elden enthusiast? I don't remember if I just said welcome back in, but welcome back in.
And if you've been following the channel for a while, you know that I spent a lot of time with those item descriptions. And you can imagine that I was pleasantly surprised when I got my hands on the full release of Elden Ring and realized that the item descriptions I thought I knew were now different to varying degrees, offering more, less, and sometimes different juicy
Okay, I just wanted to see if the telescope was different.
Flavor about the lands between. And so now we are going to dive into the items that changed the most and talk about what that means for our understanding of the world of Elden Ring and bask in a small bit of insight into From Software's iterative process of developing item descriptions that do so much to shape our understanding of their worlds. Let's get into it. First off, I want to briefly explain that while From authors the item descriptions, they work with a third-party company called Frog Nation, who collaborates to provide the final translated descriptions we get in the game. What we have in the closed network test were a collection of older iterations or From Software internal descriptions, which is very cool because we don't get many peeks behind the curtain, and this gives us some small insights into how they developed. And to kick things off, I want to look at some of the items that talk about the Royal Carrion Knights in the Academy of Raya Lucaria. In general, a lot of these items had name changes from the CNT to full release, such as the Carrion Glintstone Shield becoming the Carrion Knight Shield, the Carolus Mask becoming the Carolus Glintstone Crown, and the Carrion Sorcerer Staff becoming the Carrion Glintstone Staff. Now these aren't huge differences, but they change the flavor a bit and emphasize different facets of the Carrion faction. And one really interesting change was that the Carrion Glintstone Shield went from explaining that the Carrion Knights were originally established to counter the Academy, to making it ambiguous, asking, just who were these knights preparing to fight? This is further demonstrated by the fact that the Sorcerer Hunter skill from the CNT that can parry magic became Carrion Retaliation in the full release. Again,
that's kind of interesting because that shows that the role of the Carrion Knights weren't well established in terms of keeping them affiliated with the royalty versus the Academy.
Again, taking the emphasis off of the Carrion royal family being at odds with Raya Lucaria. Now, the conflict between the Carians and Raya Lucaria still happened in the history of the region of Liurnia, where they both preside, but is now less of a focus. And I do think this was done to lessen the focus of the flavor on the tensions between these two groups, and to make it more generally about the conflict Caria had not only with the Academy, but also with the Golden Order and Marika, who sent armies to Liurnia twice. I think this is why the Carian Knight Shield in the full release says excels when facing magic or holy attacks. And as a small final note about the Carian item descriptions, the Carian Piercer sorcery description went from stating that the spell had blades of pure moonlight epitomize the protection the moon grants to Caria, to saying armed with this spell, sorcerers gain the strength of knights, their loyalty sworn to the moon. It's not a massive change, but there is no longer mention of protection from the moon and instead talks about loyalty sworn to the moon. Now let's get into the Raya Lucaria Academy item descriptions, which I think had some interesting overhauls. Glintstone Stars in the CNT talked about the spell being an ancient sorcery thought to be close to the primeval current itself. In the full release, we instead are told a sorcery of the Olivinus Conspectus, which attracts sorcerers from Celia, Town of Sorcery. This gives us more proper nouns and flavor about the Academy and the lands between, while also remaining true to the original description. The Olivinus Conspectus was founded by Lusat, a master sorcerer who is banished from the Academy for his pursuit into the primeval current.
And for what it's worth, I'm pretty sure there is a note somewhere in the game, or maybe it's just in the files, where it says, like, Celia hides the source, but the source in this context is meant to be a reference to the primeval current, because you can read the characters for primeval current as source, so a little bit ironic, but...
It's more roundabout and less obvious in its connection to the primeval current, but it is still true nonetheless in the full release. And the Caralis mask, now called the Caralis Glintstone Crown, is interesting in how it seems to show a change in the history of the Academy during development. In the CNT...
It's the note Gowry gives you for helping him? Okay, I thought it was still in the game, but I couldn't quite remember, thank you.
He had said, a mask of heavy stone resembling the wise Caralis, a forefather of the Raya Lucarian resurgence, but in the full release it says, the Caralis Conspectus is the oldest of the Academy's lineages of study, begat by the sorcerer Azur. Scholars who follow in his footsteps pursue the mysteries of comets. And with that change, any mention of a resurgence is gone, and this lineage of study is referred to as the oldest. And even if Caralis was a person in the Academy's history, Azur has now taken center stage as the figure connected with this branch of study. The last bit about the Academy is tangential, but the Briars of Sin spell also underwent some changes. In the CNT it says that it is an aberrant sorcery discovered along with red glintstone by those exiled to the north for their crimes, and that the Academy reviles this sorcery which draws its power from faith. In the full release, this became an aberrant sorcery discovered by exiled criminals. Theirs are the sorceries most reviled by the Academy. The guilty, their eyes gouged by thorns, lived in eternal darkness. There, they discovered the Blood Star.
I wonder if some of that was a little bit the same in 1.0, because the Academy reviles the sorcery which draws from its power from faith is kind of what I remembered from it. So, yeah, when was this video made? April 3rd. So maybe it got changed with the day one patch, because, yeah, that could make sense. I should double check this. Briars of Sin? Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and check it now, just because I'm a little bit too curious. Okay, yeah, the 1.0 description is pretty much the same. In that, as you can see, it says the Academy reviles the sorcery which draws its power from faith. Okay.
Lived in eternal darkness. There, they discovered the Blood Star. Exiled criminals are still mentioned, but the Academy's reason for revulsion is less defined in the description, and it adds the evocative Blood Star. I do think that the Academy reviles this sorcery because of its connection to faith, and even though the North is not mentioned anymore, the leaders of the fire monks who dwell in the North on the mountaintop of the giants wield the Thorned Whip, which is modeled after the Briars of Sin. So in general, it seems that the information from the CNT description is probably still true, but is swapped out for some more evocative information, including the concept of the Blood Star. And while we're on the topic of evocative space stuff, let's talk about the interchangeably named Alabaster/Onyx Lords and the Underground Ruins. The Ash of War Gravitas in the CNT was referred to as a skill from a Great White King with stone skin, and now is explained as a skill originating from the Alabaster Lords who had skin of stone. This is an
Yeah, I'm pretty sure this is probably more of like a localization cleanup. I think they're probably just still called like White Lord in Japanese, which is obviously White King or Alabaster Lord.
a huge change beyond getting rid of a king for a bunch of lords, but in general the gravity-related spells from the CNT have moved towards talking about the Alabaster/Onyx Lords. The Meteorite spell in the CNT stated that in the Eternal City, now lost in ruin underground, meteorites held the same import as stars. And now the spell's item description says,
that's interesting. So the Nox believed meteors held the same importance as stars. Okay, I guess that's not... Huh. I mean, it is kind of interesting, but... Yeah, because it's not the moon, it's the meteorites. So could that mean the Nox are more affiliated with gravity magic? Is that, like, their actual difference? That could explain quite a bit, perhaps.
this sorcery originates from the Onyx Lords, who had skin of stone and were called lords in reverential fear of their destructive power. From Software really loves these lords that they can't seem to decide how to name, and you might say they sound really similar.
Again, this is more of a Frog Nation kind of thing, because I did look it up for the Alabaster Lord, like I thought. So we have the character for White and the character for Lord, so like White Lord, White King, Alabaster Lord.
But maybe the Alabaster and Onyx Lords are different. And they're not. The Alabaster Lord's sword says, Greatsword forged from a blue-white meteoric ore. The blade conceals gravity-manipulating magic, a weapon unique to the Alabaster Lords, a race of ancients with skin of stone who were said to have risen to life when a meteor struck long ago. And the Onyx Lord's greatsword says, Greatsword forged from the golden-hued meteoric ore. The blade conceals gravity-manipulating magic, a weapon unique to the Onyx Lords, a race of ancients with skin of stone who were said to have risen to life when a meteor struck long ago. Besides the hue of the meteoric ore, these weapons basically have the same description, but I would love to hear a treatise on the range of stone men who came to life when a meteor struck the lands between long ago, so feel free to leave it in the comments if you want to.
So now I'm wondering whether or not the Nox and whatnot were originally the Alabaster and or the Onyx Lords, because if they believed that meteorites had all that power, I could see those kind of connections. Although maybe not, because like the Alabaster Lords came to life after the meteorites came in. Yeah, so this is just really weird, and I will definitely need to think about this one more.
And lastly, regarding the underground ruins, we have Magic Bubble from the CNT, which became Oracle Bubbles in the full release. Originally described as a lost, ancient glintstone sorcery used by wretches who dwell in the underground ruins, it now says sorcery of the claymen who served as priests in the ancient dynasty. The claymen search for lost oracles within their bubbles. It isn't saying anything totally new, but it is more evocative hearing about the claymen and lost oracles as opposed to some garden variety wretches, and the hook of learning more about this ancient dynasty is enticing. Now let's move into some items talking about the Golden Order. In general, these items talk much less about the Finger Maidens in the full release than they did in the CNT. Heal and other incantations that started with an incantation taught by Maidens of the Finger Reader now say incantation of the Two Fingers Faithful. And in the case of heal, as well as urgent heal,
I wonder if this is part of a Japanese thing where the no particle was a little bit unclear. So it could have been meant to be understood as Finger Reader Maidens. So they could have just truncated that to like the faithful of the Two Fingers. Hey, without horns, welcome back in. Nectarine likes the Ancient Dynasty. You hope there's more items referencing them. Yeah, I wish there were like more items referencing like everything at this point. Feels bad, man.
of the Two Fingers Faithful. And in the case of heal, as well as urgent heal, which has the same item description, another reference to the Finger Maidens is removed as the maidens served the Two Fingers by guiding the Tarnished to grace in accordance with its mighty will, becomes the Two Fingers has high hopes for the Tarnished that even if they should be wounded, even if they should fall, they will continue to fight for their duty. The Crimson and Cerulean Tear Flasks also remove information about the Finger Maidens, where originally they stated in the CNT that it is said that a Finger Maiden will bestow 2 such chalices upon the chosen Tarnished when they meet, and in the full release it became, the one washed up on the gravesite was sure to die, until this flask offered its gift of rejuvenation, to seek the Elden Ring. My dorky in-world reasoning that isn't necessary because in reality it is strictly iterative changes from the item descriptions, is that the item descriptions were meant for your typical Tarnished with a maiden, and once the scribes of the item descriptions in the Lands Between learned that our character was maidenless, they changed them all to better suit our situation. I can't believe Elden Ring is pandering to the player now. Really though, I think it makes more sense to keep the focus on the Tarnished and the Two Fingers demanding obedience, as that is a central theme of the game and especially in the first half of the story. The Litany of Proper Death incantation brings up a more general change in that the more generic term lived beyond death used in the CNT is replaced in this item description and others with those who live in death, which makes sense as it is the official term used in the game and makes more sense with the lore of Godwyn and others existing in death, which in this world takes a more palpable and consuming form.
So Without Horns asks, or they state really, that they wonder who the Tarnished Maidens are. So, the other Tarnished Maidens are. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a good question. I have wondered whether or not Melina is like all of their Tarnished Maiden, because they kind of show up in the Round Table Hold. Maybe Varya is an exception and had a different one whom he killed. But yeah, that's a good question. Hey, Choppy the Beast, welcome back to the stream.
Litany of Proper Death, the phrase produces an arc of gold that deals holy damage is replaced with creates an image of order, dealing holy damage to nearby foes, which is a stronger phrase and evokes the word order, and the Golden Order has explicitly removed destined death from the equation, which is why the Golden Order is so against those who live in death, which is a product of a fragment of the Rune of Death being used against the demigods and damaging the balance of the Golden Order. Which I think is why the final sentence of the Litany of Death went from, these fundamentals hold that through study guided by the laws of the Golden Order, knowledge itself is the root of holiness, to the role of the hunters is to stamp out defiled reason, all for the perfection of the Golden Order. The more generic, if still interesting phrasing from the CNT is replaced with something that gets more at the heart of the major topic of destined death and its relationship to the Golden Order. Changing gears, Feast Upon Flame.
Obviously, I do feel like the network test version does state a lot more clearly what is more subtextual in the final build of the game, but I think they both kind of have a place and serve a purpose in the greater narrative of the game there.
To the Golden Order. Changing gears, Feast Upon Flame, now called Flame Sling in the full release, has changed in order to describe another threat to the Golden Order. Originally it stated an incantation from the Fire Monks, Guardians of the Giant's Flame of Ruin. Produces and throws a ball of raging fire. Charging up this incantation makes it more powerful and causes the ball to explode. Fire beguiles those who look upon it. Those who would guard the flame would also come to worship it. In the full release it says, incantation originating from a sinister prophecy. Throws a ball of raging fire. Charging enhances potency and causes the ball of fire to explode. The Flame of Ruin is anathema to the Erd Tree, but prophets sometimes glimpse it within the faith all the same. Sadly, when this occurs, their sole reward is banishment. The spell went from being an incantation of the fire monks who do guard the Flame of Ruin to being an incantation that sprung from a sinister prophecy seeing the Erd Tree burned by the Flame of Ruin, which does ultimately come to fruition in the game.
That's really interesting to me because I'm pretty sure Corrin has a couple of these fire incantations to begin with, which would seem a little bit unintuitive based on like the rest of his quest line and trying to adhere to the Golden Order. But yeah, I guess that makes sense that they didn't necessarily have to originate in the fire monks, although that is not what I would have expected, because the fire monk sigil still appears there, or like the fire giant sigil still appears when you use it, I'm pretty sure.
The concept of exiled prophets was, and still is, described by the prophet set that I will soon discuss, but it spreads out the details into the spell and gives more words to it, which makes sense to me. The blindfold of the prophet set originally said, blindfold of exiled prophets who foresaw that their faith would end in flames and were persecuted and driven from their homes as a result. After all, what use is eyesight to those who claim to know the true path? Now it says blindfold of exiled prophets who foretold misfortune and were persecuted and driven from their homes as a result. Why hesitate if the path leading to the future is clear? Just close your eyes and walk. They've taken out details of what the prophets saw, which could indicate there were various prophecies, but I personally think it's still likely the Flame of Ruin, and that they wanted to talk about that in a more appropriate item like Fire Sling, which also lets them spread the lore out a bit to let the players make the connection themselves. I'm glad the final line of the blindfold in the full release still has the same sass that it had in the CNT, which reads to me as a mocking tone that would come from some Golden Order stooge. Although Flame Sling was traded from
I do really like the final line or lines of the prophet's blindfold because I don't know, there's something very poignant about it. Like, what need is there to see the path if you like already know it? So yeah, just kind of a really insightful, pun intended, I suppose.
From the fire monks to the prophets in the full release, the fire monks were able to seal the contract with the incantation O Flame. The wording of the item changes a bit, going from an incantation of the fire monks, Guardians of the Giant's Flame of Ruin, to incantation of the fire monks. The giant's flame still smolders upon the distant northern mountaintop, and the fire monks are its guardians. The description in the full release gives more detail and adds that tantalizing bit about the flame still smoldering, and stating that the mountaintop is to the north gives the player a direction to peer in, which wouldn't have mattered in the CNT anyways because you could not see the mountain. Changing topics, some items like the dragon scale blade have changed.
Interesting, I didn't know you can see the mountain in the closed network test. I should really go back to see some people's let's plays or explorations of this build of the game. Huh. Okay.
Changing topics, some items like the dragon scale blade have changes that alter their very origin. In the CNT, it said a weapon forged from the memories of dragonkin soldiers, burnished with the essence of draconic immortality. Alas, the dragonkin never attained immortality and perish as mere imitations of the ancient dragons.
So, forged from the memories of dragonkin soldiers. I wonder if these are supposed to be remembrances originally. But I mean, this part isn't too, crazy to me just because Ashes of War are essentially memories to begin with anyway, so yeah.
Now it says, a weapon made by sharpening a gravelstone scale, thought to be the source of ancient dragon immortality, into an unclouded blade. Alas, the Dragonkin soldiers never attained immortality and perished as decrepit, pale imitations of their skyborn kin. While they both describe the ultimate failure of the Dragonkin soldiers, the blade is no longer forged from the memories of Dragonkin soldiers, a heady and metal concept, and is now a weapon made by sharpening a gravelstone scale, thought to be the source of ancient dragon mortality, into an unclouded blade. That's decidedly more grounded sounding, but also helps better explain the facets of the world, such as the gravelstone being thought to be the source of dragon immortality. Gravelstone is mentioned elsewhere, like with the dragon heart, and this change may be a little less evocative to me, but it just makes more sense and fits better in context. Next we have the spirit jellyfish ashes. In the CNT it said spirit ashes. Summons a spirit jellyfish, floating phantom that illuminates its surroundings, seemingly the lingering spirit of a young girl on an eternal search for her sister, with whom she'd promised to see the stars. In the full release it says ashen remains in which spirits yet dwell, used to summon a spirit jellyfish, a floating spirit that illuminates its surroundings. Prone to tears, the jellyfish girl searches for her distant home. Will bravely spew poison at foes on her summoner's behalf. It seems her name is Aurelia.
So yeah, the closed network text version, it makes it a lot clearer that it would be associated with the other jellyfish sister in the mountaintops. So, a little bit of a shame they couldn't manage to get all of this into one description.
Spew poison at foes on her summoner's behalf. It seems her name is Aurelia. The description removes information about her sister and seeing the stars, but these bits are now expressed elsewhere as they exist in a very cute questline that has the extremely rare happy ending in a FromSoft game. And
if you overlook that they're already dead, but yeah, fairly happy for sure.
Now I have one more item which I think has had the most egregious change made to its description between the CNT and the full release.
Eldeguso asks, wait, so ghosts often take the form of animals? It doesn't seem like they do it often, but for some reason there are spirit jellyfish, and they tend to appear near graveyards and stuff. So, yeah, I don't entirely know what's going on with them, to be honest.
In fact, I would go so far to say that this is my biggest disappointment from the CNT to full release with regard to the item descriptions, and one of the biggest mistakes Miyazaki has ever made. That is the turtleneck meat. In the CNT it said, a splendid, lengthy cut of turtleneck meat, material used for crafting items. Turtle meat is said to boost virility, but none in the lands between seem to have much appetite for it these days. In the lands between, the urge to reproduce has waned long ago. And now, in the full release, it says, a splendid, lengthy cut of turtleneck meat, material used for crafting items, considered an especially nutritious ingredient in the south of the lands between. I can't believe Miyazaki would remove the sexiest item description in Elden Ring and replace it with such a vanilla consolation prize. It is outrageous. I'm sure From Software had their reasons, but they're not good enough. Hashtag not my turtleneck meat.
I don't necessarily know about that, because on one hand, I do get what they're going for with this version of the description, but they might have wanted to not imply that sexual urges were completely gone in the lands between, which I think is a fair thing to say, because there are some children being born ? With Raya and the Snake Men, but certainly it would also help the narrative to say that the urge for sexual reproduction was diminished, potentially as a result of destined death being removed from the cycle, for sure.
There are other minor changes to item descriptions between the CNT and the full release, of which you can check out more through a link in the video description, but these were the most significant. I think the changes were largely additive, and it was cool to get a peek into the process and gain more understanding about how they go about presenting lore in their games. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please give it a like, and if you want more Elden Ring content from a guy who can't stop reading item descriptions, subscribe to the Lore Hunter. Thanks for watching.
Alright, so that was a
I
fun
would
video.
like to give special thanks for this video to JMH for helping support me on Patreon, as well as everyone else listed on the screen. Thanks so much for your support.
Alright, I've gone ahead and linked it into chat. And El Degusto, if you need turtleneck meat, I'm sorry, I can't exactly help you out with that, but you might be able to get some more support by going and seeing a doctor. Alright, so now we'll go ahead and move on into Duality and Twins by Smotown.
I've found myself increasingly fascinated with the notion of balance and duality. At the end of Elden Ring, we are presented with the dual nature of a god, two beings of contrasting temperament, yet housed within a single body, Marika and Radigan. The moon and the Erd tree, life and death, silver and gold, Moog and Morgott, Mikola and Melania. What is the relevance of these themes? Today I will provide you with my interpretation of these, but first of all, a word from today's sponsor, Opera GX, the #1 browser for us gamers with a Z. Opera GX is armed to the teeth with a whole host of tools to enhance your gaming experience, like limiting how much RAM and CPU your browser takes up.
Oh, that's actually really nice. I was going to say, I thought this was just like a browser. I didn't know it had like game extensions and whatnot.
As well as having integrated quick links to sites like Twitch and Twitter. Of course, one of the coolest things about the browser is how good it looks, and how you can adorn it with one of its many mods, such as this really cool medieval mod. It's easy to activate with one click of a button, and it gives your browser a cool animated background music, and keyboard sound effects, as well as opening and closing
How do I disable it?
tab noises. What I personally really like about the mod system is that you can combine elements of different mods together to suit your preference, so I can have the aesthetics of a cyberpunk browser with the cool dragon background. Switching to Opera GX has never been easier, as you can import your bookmarks, browsing history, cookies and passwords from your previous browser with just one click.
Oh, that's
so if
very
you want
smart.
to optimize your browsing experience and even get a unique tab that shows all of my videos, then download Opera GX using my link below. Thanks again to Opera GX for sponsoring this video, and now back to the lore. Duality has long...
Although, to be honest, it is kind of weird to me that a browser is sponsoring videos, which just kind of leads me to believe that it is taking your data and selling it to third parties. Which, rip, use Firefox, folks.
Being a focus of From Software games, most obviously in Dark Souls, Light and Dark, Chaos and Death, and so I'm not pretending it is something new to From Software games. Rather, I've always had this subject in the back of my mind, nagging me. It's something I want to discuss because it is so prevalent with Elden Ring in particular. So many elements or forces in Elden Ring have an opposite or an inversion, whether it be the Greater Will and the Frenzied Flame, or Morgott and Moog's contrasting ideologies about their omen condition. Each of these dualities have something interesting to share, whether it be a simple contrasting narrative device, or whether it be a deeper reference to lunar and solar archetypes and balance as a whole. We will be unpacking some of these subjects today, as well as reconciling it with the ideologies of the Golden Order fundamentalists, whose aims seem to revolve around reconciliation of all matter.
This is something that I can't help but notice sometimes. It's like when enemies in the background aren't like fully rendered, so they like play at like 5 FPS.
Fundamentalists, whose aims seem to revolve around reconciliation of all matter. Ultimately, by the end of this video, I hope to have explored the meaning behind some of these examples, and why duality is so important to Elden Ring as a whole, and the main conflicts found within its story. But before we get started, guys, remember that if you like Elden Ring lore, then consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. In Dark Souls 1, in the very first cinematic, we are introduced to the ideas of duality, light and dark, heat and cold, life and death. Yet it only came with disparity, and before this there was just neutrality, a grey world of unliving stone dragons. Likewise, we hear a similar story in Elden Ring, a time of when there was only one form of life, the One Great.
All that there is came from the One Great. Then came fractures
She's not even blind. She's totally peaky.
and births and souls. But the greater will made a mistake. Torment, despair, affliction, every sin, every curse.
I think it's fair to assume that in this time when life was just one, there were no dualities, and so this is our inciting cosmological event that laid the foundations for disparity. And my speculation is that because we see so much examples of duality and balance within the world of Elden Ring, is that with this disparity came a system of balance, that this world exists in a state of balance and opposing forces, an inversion of each element or a Newtonian response. Naturally, being a system of opposing forces, this can sometimes generate conflict. However, at the end of this video I will present what I believe to be the perfect harmonious balance between two twins that we find in the game.
I feel like an incoming Rebus reference is imminent.
The concept of two opposing elements making a whole is such a fundamental basic to life, science and philosophy. From the double helix strands of DNA, the sun and the moon, mothers and fathers, life and death, and yin and yang. So it is no surprise that these ideas permeate mythologies across numerous cultures. In the mythology of many cultures, the moon and the sun has always been the most fundamental of dualities, both sources of light, the symbols of night and day, personified in certain mythologies to be opposing and yet symbiotic. And so with that said, I'd like to start with what I see as the most fundamental duality in Elden Ring.
You know what's absolutely crazy on like a cosmological scale is just how the size of the moon almost perfectly aligning with the size of the sun is just absolutely mind-boggling. And then when you add on to the fact that the moon is rotation locked with the Earth, so we only ever see like one side of it at a time, just absolutely crazy, cosmologically speaking, that these kind of odds would line up in such a way. So part of me is like kind of wondered like how the course of human history and knowledge of astronomy and like math and stuff would have been different had the moon not really been locked in rotation with the Earth. So that way people could understand that the moon was like an orbiting figure that rotated because it like stayed the same orientation. It made it seem as though it didn't spin, so it kind of gave more people evidence to believe like the Earth probably didn't spin, and therefore like go along with all the flat Earth stuff, or like the not heliocentric, but the globe-centric, whatever it's called, Earth-centric universes to be more likely. So anyway, aliens made the moon. Oh man. True to your name, aren't you, conspiracy? Yeah, no other moon we've seen behaves like ours. Yeah, it's all crystal spheres, man. Yeah, the moon is just lights, man. Geocentric. Wow, I'm really struggling. Thank you. What's about this, the moon and the sun size relation? So, okay, if you think about it from the perspective of... Oh no, let's pull out our handy dandy MS Paint. If you think about it from the perspective of, like, people on the Earth, and just how like absolutely massive the sun is on like a, solar scale. Wait, why did this one change? Anyway, let's do gray. This will be the moon. So if you're on Earth and you look up and you see the moon. From your vantage point here, oh god, the moon can completely block out the sun, or almost completely, like, block out the sight lines of the sun. So I should stick to this. Essentially, and so it looks like they're the same size. So even though the moon is ridiculously closer to the Earth is than the sun is, it makes them seem as though they have almost like equivalent pulls on the Earth, cosmologically speaking. We've also got like the tidal effect of the moon, which is directly observable. So it's just kind of crazy how all of this stuff came into play, which could give people more reason to believe in either like a flat Earth kind of theory, because like the moon always appears flat. Like, even though it's obviously like a circular, it only ever has one face. You can't exactly discern other faces of the sun. And for people before like telescopes were invented, they wouldn't have been able to discern like the different faces of like other planets like Mars or like Venus and stuff like that. So it's just kind of absolutely bonkers crazy, the size of the moon in relation to Earth and the sun, and like the distance in which we view it, to look almost equivalent to each other. Hey G6BR, welcome in. You thought the tarnished archaeologist criticism was kind of harsh? You think I should be able to criticize anything, but some adjectives were kind of mean anyway? Just your opinion? No, it's totally fine. I appreciate you expressing your opinion here, and I'll continue to do what I'm doing, criticizing everybody and also praising things which I enjoy. So, yeah. As far as the Tarnished Archaeologist video, the one that I like have, well, the most recent one on the channel, I thought there were some pretty harmful theories presented about the lore in relation to the Shattering, which required that kind of direct criticism, unfortunately. Thank you. All right. And Methoda says our moon is actually way larger than most in a planet to moon ratio. Yeah, usually they're way smaller than their planets. True story. Obligatory moon's haunted. Okay.
The moon and the Erd Tree. Like in Dark Souls, the moon plays an important role within Elden Ring's mythology. However, unlike Dark Souls, where the moon is the counterpoint to the sun, instead, the opposite to the moon in Elden Ring is the Erd Tree / the Elden Ring. As many have observed, the sun actually plays a very minor role within Elden Ring, to the point that it's almost not even visible within the sky.
Yeah, and in the lands between, the sun is ridiculously small and the moons are orders of magnitude larger than the sun in comparison to us with the moon and the earth and the sun.
It's clear that the Erd Tree plays the role of a sun symbolically in this world. Not only does it illuminate the lands, but it also once gave off heat, a fact we can learn of via the warming stone. One of the most well-known philosophies of balance is that of yin and yang, a Chinese philosophical concept that presents the world as a system of balance between opposing yet interconnected forces. Yin is the receptive or passive element, but is also represented by the moon, and generally is associated with the feminine. Conversely, yang is the active masculine aspect, represented by the sun. They are two halves of the fundamentals of the world. One even brings the night, and the other the day, the light and the shadow. These elements of yin really help explain the foundation of the moon's depiction within Souls games as a whole. The moon has very much always been associated with the feminine in Dark Souls. The Dark Moon Gwendolyn is raised as a girl, because he was born with a strong affinity to the moon. Likewise in Elden Ring, it seems to be the women of the Carian family specifically who are the inheritors of the moon's legacy. Renala makes contact with the full moon, then leads her daughter Rani by the hand, who is introduced to her moon, the dark moon. The moon and the sun being associated with the feminine and masculine respectively isn't just an Eastern concept, however. In Roman mythology, Luna is a female, whereas Sol is a masculine figure. As for why the moon seems to be associated with sorcery in both Souls and Elden Ring, I believe it simply comes down to the fact that culturally magic is more associated with women and feminine energies. However, that being said, the moon is also associated with magic itself. Moon magic is a thing, and often occult practices revolve around lunar cycles. Finally, yin is also the passive element of the yin and yang balance. This connection is made in the game Warframe as well. In Warframe's choice system, you can either make...
So that was a bit of an unexpected comparison, I'll admit there. So yeah, as Without Horn said, one of my favorite comparison points with Gwendolyn being raised as a girl is that Guinevere was raised as a boy because she was like the princess of sunlight, you know?
sun decisions or moon decisions. Sun decisions are the passionate ones, whether that be acting in anger or in violence, or on the flip side, showing empathy. Whereas the moon decisions in Warframe are shown as the detached, emotionless decisions, where logic dictates the action of the player. Likewise, in Elden Ring, the Order of the Moon seems to be a detached order of logic. This is reflected in Ranni's speech if you choose the Age of Stars.
Now cometh the age of the stars, 1,000-year voyage under the wisdom of the moon. Here beginneth the chill night that encompasses all, reaching the great beyond, into fear, doubt, and loneliness, as the path stretcheth into darkness.
This is a subject we have discussed previously in my Ranni lore video. The translation is a little odd, and I would recommend that video if you'd like to see some better translations. But in essence, what Ranni is saying here is that her order will be at a great remove from Earth. It will be present in the cosmos, untouched by emotion, faith, and close contact.
It was a little bit ironic and hilarious to me that he said it's a great remove from Earth, when he obviously meant the lands between, but I just can't let stuff like that go. Alright. Conspiracy thinks life had to exist first so that the tree and beast had something to usurp in the first place. Yeah, and that's very arguable because many people believe that life could have existed within the paradigm of being brought or introduced into the lands between through Elden Stars, but there's a lot to argue with that. What a nice speech. You hope she actually said that in Japanese. Yeah, I was a little bit surprised that Smo said like there's better descriptions in his video, because I know it's a very contentious topic amongst the fans.
Her order being far away from the people that she governs, in the cold abyss of space, sounds like a very cold, logical, and passive order if I ever heard one. A yin order. Contrasted with the active order of the Erd Tree, that is very direct, very present and active. It very much directly moves to impose its order upon the world, even beginning a series of violent conquests to achieve such an end. A very yang order. But this analogy also does somewhat spill into the alchemical realm. From the Black Moon worshipping Nox, we can find out that the moon is also associated with silver. From the silver tears to the silver mist that their night maidens spray from their mouths, all of which I see as analogous to Mercury, one of the 3 prime elements in alchemy. And at a stretch, we could see the gold of the Erd Tree as analogous to sulfur, or the soul. In alchemy there are 3 prime materials, the neutral base matter salt, and then the 2 opposing materials we have just mentioned, sulfur and mercury. Sulfur and mercury follow some of the similar dichotomies that we've just discussed about yin and yang. Sulfur, like yang, is the active, aggressive element that is meant to represent the soul. The greatest lore item in the game, the Albinauric blood clot, shows that the Albinaurics themselves have a silver blood, and its item description highlights the fact that they are reviled by most living things in the lands between because they are artificial.
So is this where we're going to get the secret Smotown lore about the Albinauric blood clot that everybody's been talking about? His version of soap and golden poop?
Reinforcing the fact that these mercury-blooded creatures are merely the material aspect of the world, and they are without soul or sulfur, because they are disconnected from the source or nexus of souls, the Erd Tree. The magnum opus of alchemy is to reconcile and combine these materials into the perfect substance. So yeah,
just to back that up a little bit, it's kind of hard to tell exactly if Smowtown is speaking a bit more metaphorically here in certain parts. Like, obviously, with him referring to the Albinaurics as Mercury and Sulfur, that much is understood as a metaphor. But saying that the Erd Tree is, what did he say, the source or the nexus of souls, and the Albinaurics are disconnected from it, that could make it sound as though he's implying that the Albinaurics don't have souls, which I think is contradicted in the Albinauric spirit ashes having spirits. But okay.
Of souls, the Erd Tree. The magnum opus of alchemy is to reconcile and combine these materials into the perfect substance. One of the allegorical depictions of such a union is known as the Rebus, an immortal being, the combination of the White Queen, Mercury, and the Red King, of the male and female, into one whole. The relevance of this to Elden Ring should be quite obvious, as it makes us think of Radagon being the Red King, and Marika, the White Queen. Again, these two are meant to be opposing forces, and yet in Elden Ring we find them forced into a single body. And so this alchemical analogy gives us two states of being. You can have two opposing matters in a system of balance, or you have convergence. And we will return to this topic near the end of the video when we talk about Golden Order fundamentalism. But I want to move on to the subject of twins, as we do find quite a lot of twins in Elden Ring. And twins in mythologies are often the personification of the themes of duality, shadows and contrasts, which is why religion and mythology quite often contain stories of twins, Romulus and Remus, and Castor and Pollux, just to name a few. One of the most clear and obvious examples of twins is the Omen twins, Mohg and Morgott. Both Omen, yet both represent radically different philosophies about their condition. The Omen are a fascinating subset of beings. They are aesthetically associated with the age of the Crucible, grotesque and bestial, strong in violence, and with physical forms as chaotic as the Crucible itself. Yet the real crux of the Omen condition is their souls, which have become disconnected from the Erd Tree, the nexus of life in this world. The Seedbed Curse is a good tool to understand the Omen condition with, as these are the poxes that the Dung Eater spreads the Omen Curse with. It reads the following: by doing so, he prevents dead souls returning to the Erd Tree, leaving them forever cursed, one of the most loathsome things found in the lands between. These beings are cursed.
And I've talked about this before on the streams, that the Seedbed Curse, in the Japanese at least, says that it prevents death from returning to the Erd Tree, which might not be that important, but just like the phrasing of it in Japanese is very interesting. In some ways, I like the phrasing of the English a bit more, because it seems more intuitive to think that like they're dead souls going back to the Erd Tree. But if it is meant to actually be death itself, I am curious if that is supposed to coincide with the rolled finger reader crone dialogue, which says like burning the Erd Tree will unleash destined death itself, essentially. And so, well, obviously that finger reader is sort of technically wrong in a sense that death isn't released as a direct consequence of burning the Erd Tree. She might be right in saying that death is contained within the Erd Tree, which is just kind of a not what I would have initially expected, because of the way that like death works as a concept. So like if death can be moved from like one being and like transferred into something else, then maybe the way that the rune of death and destined death is sealed is because the Erd Tree is containing it within itself. But that's kind of a really nebulous, speculative thought right there. And now, the other thing that I did want to mention is with the Omen Curse, it seems as though Dung Eater is more or less taking the horns of the Omen and implanting them into bodies. So that way the curses contained within the Omen horns will infect the spirits of the dead and cause them to become cursed. And because something is cursed, it is no longer or never was technically dead. And so it wouldn't go back to the Erd Tree if it isn't dead. And It is also possible by doing this, he's kind of creating more horns in the process. That part is a little bit vague, but anyway. Curses in this game can... How do I say it without like sounding super redundant? If you curse something, it becomes cursed, so it's a curse and doesn't go to the Erdtree. But that is kind of like unironically, literally true, even though it kind of sounds like a nonsense sentence on the surface. The more you learn about this Dung Eater guy, the more loathsome you think he is. All right, Norm. Alchemy is entirely allegorical. You think a lot of the new to alchemy lore tubers are missing this? Yes and no. Like some people obviously believed it. It did become more allegorical in some circles, but yeah, you're not exactly wrong. The metalworking chemistry stuff was real, okay, but it was emergent from their understanding of the soul, God, and universe. In other words, they thought that the structure of the elements mirrored the structure of the soul kind of thing, to your understanding? Okay. It wasn't until around the 16th century in Europe that any real spiritual movement took hold for alchemy. Okay, thank you. About death sealed in the Erdtree, G6BR thinks it's linked to the struggle Gideon said Marika wanted us to do. Maybe she took the grace from the Tarnished and sent them away to manipulate the greater will somehow. Yeah, I don't really know about that. I think it was Crunchy. Was it Crunchy who had the interesting idea that Marika may have trapped in the two fingers of the round table hold as a way to distort its attempt at communications with the greater will? And so she might have like sort of freed herself from the control of the two fingers by like imprisoning it. But that's just kind of unrelated. I don't know why I brought that up. Drunk Mage, welcome in. You thought Dung Eater's ending implied a boom in the future Omen population? So I would disagree with that. I totally get why people think it. And the reason I disagree that there would be more Omen, at least in a literal sense, is because... Let's see... The Omen set that you get from Dung Eater mentions that the whole... Okay, worn by the Dung Eater, its form is a vision of the landscape of his mind and of his appearance as he wished to see it. The heart of an Omen without the body to match. Could there be any crueler existence? What does it matter then if the curse claims it all? So, if you have the heart of an Omen but without the body, that kind of means you're an Omen in that you're cursed, but you don't have all the horns and stuff to go with it. So I don't think people become like literal omens as they see them, although they probably become similar to an omen in the grand scheme of existence in the lands between. Sounds like a real jerk. Hey, Paul, welcome into the stream. Nice to have you. Without Horn says, you wonder if the curse is the unformed mother or whatever. Gets a hold of your soul like the omen, and that's why you don't return to the tree. I don't necessarily think it has to involve the formless mother or the mother of truth, because the way that curses work in previous FromSoft games are kind of similar in that they eat at the existence of the host organism, and so I think something similar is probably going on with Elden Ring, where if you get cursed by something, it will allow, like, it causes you torment, and by virtue of having feelings and pain and stuff, that means you're kind of alive in Dark Souls as well as, what's this called? Elden Ring. And although I've mentioned this in previous streams, I may as well, like, pull it up now since we're talking about it. In Dark Souls 2, I think it's made perhaps, like, the most clear in the Ring of the Living. So, the Ring of the Living... Maybe I should have... Okay, this will be good enough. The ring jabs into the skin, creating a throbbing pain that serves as a constant reminder of one's humanity. So, pain equals life in these games, or at least they're signs that you're alive, and this ties into like the skeletal mask in Elden Ring, which says that this ritual implement relentlessly digs into the wearer's face, preserving one's human instincts while dressed in imitation of the Deathbirds. And then we also have a similar kind of thing going on with the bloody finger, and that the part of the finger that's drained of blood doesn't feel anything anymore, and the nail, which still has blood in it, like aches, I guess. So like blood is kind of related to life, and when we tie all of this kind of imagery into the Baldachin's blessing, it's made kind of abundantly clear that that which is dead doesn't actually experience any pain or suffering, because wait, what did I just do? The favor allows one to forget any aches and pains. In death, there's only peace, for in death, there can be no sensation. So, if you're dead, you don't feel anything, but if you're cursed to feel these negative emotions, pain, torment, rancor, all that kind of thing. Oh, maybe I should like look up family heads, but hopefully like this stuff should be clear enough by now, I think. You thought that description was just referring to the Dung Eater himself? I think it is, but the fact that it also mentions that it represents the landscape in his heart, I think you can more or less directly compare that to what his mending rune should visualize. Okay, thank you. You thought Dung Eater wasn't actually cursed, but he felt like he was, which is why he imitated the omen. He needed us to curse him in the end. What a kooky little fella. Yeah, I think that's a good summary of it, in that he wasn't cursed initially, but he felt that the Golden Order and the Erd Tree was like the equivalent of a curse. And so by cursing everybody else, he kind of essentially will eventually free them from the control of the Erd Tree. And then once everybody's free of the control of the Erd Tree, they are cursed no more, because they'll be blessed to be freed from it. You wish that were you?
The most loathsome things found in the lands between. These beings are cursed insomuch that their souls die but are unable to return to the Erd Tree. This is why, for me, some of the powers of the Omen are comparable, visually, to those who live in death. And for clarity, I'm talking about the brown-black flames that Royal Omen are able to produce, which is very visually similar to the white-black flame of Ghost Flame.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, these kind of are described almost exactly the same way. I think maybe in the English, but the Japanese, it is equivocated that the wraiths which come out of the Omen are the same kind of wraiths which are found in hexes. So Smotown is right on the money here, at least with this comparison.
Flame which sprouts from those who live in death when they begin to respawn. Remember that those who live in death are born from Godwyn, a being who died in soul only, and so in that way the Omen are very similar, both a set of beings who have dead souls. And we are beginning to see a pattern here of who the fundamentalists hate.
So I'm trying to think if Smotown is trying to say that their souls are literally dead and therefore they are soulless, or that there's something else going on. I think for the sake of argument, I might be misunderstanding Smotown here. He might not have meant it this way, but just, for clarity for anybody in chat and whatnot, I would say that those who live in death and the Omen technically don't have dead souls. They still have souls, because when you get those who live in death's spirit ashes, it makes it clear that those who live in death still possess souls, whereas Godwyn himself does not. So even though Godwyn and Deathroot produce those who live in death, technically they are not those who live in death themselves, which is very confusing and not what I initially expected playing through the game. And I really had to reframe my train of thought about that as well.
Those who live in death, the Omen, and the Albinaurics, all groups that are disconnected from the Erdtree recycling system. Ultimately, Morgott accepts the judgment of the Golden Order, believing that his Omen form to be accursed, that mars the purity of the thrones and of the Erdtree.
The thrones, stained by my curse, such shame I cannot bear. Thy part in this shall not be forgiven.
Yet his twin Mohg is the opposite. In the depths of the sewers, he rejected the condemnation of the Erdtree Order, and not only accepted his accursed blood, but learned to love it, and wear it on his sleeve, let it become his own standard for his power base. So what is the thematic role of Mohg and Morgott in their contrasting ideologies? Well, there are several facets to it. Firstly, I believe it is just a simple relationship of contrasts, two opposing brothers that highlight the damaging effects of the Golden Order dogma. Both are afflicted by it in different ways. One is gaslit into hating themselves, and the other is radicalized, forced to become exactly what the Golden Order labels them to be. But mainly, these two are just thematically harmonious with the rest of Elden Ring, by bringing another set of dualities into a story that is filled with them already, reinforcing the notion that everything in this world has a shadow, everything exists in balance.
So I think maybe another way to look at the dichotomy between Morgott and Mohg is that Morgott would never think to use the Erdtree and its blessings as fuel for the fire within him, whereas I think Mohg kind of accepts that the Erdtree and its blessings can be used in a different kind of way. And I wonder whether or not the reason he became besotted with the defilements in his blood is because he's like literally putting fire to the curses within his blood, and it might feel good and like soothe him, whereas Morgott just kind of accepts it and like causes him suffering. So like, yeah, acceptance versus like guilt, I guess. I don't know.
Dualities into a story that is filled with them already, reinforcing the notion that everything in this world has a shadow, everything exists in balance. But with that said, I think we talk about the elephant in the room now when we're talking about duality, and that is the Golden Order fundamentalists. The fundamentalist school of the Golden Order seems to tout convergence and regression, a focus on completeness rather than balance. This of course can be traced back to Radagon himself, whose talisman tells us that he aspires to be complete. To me, the idea of completeness again goes back to the alchemical idea of the rebus, the reconciliation and combination of all matter. Indeed, under Radagon, the fundamentalists reject a system of balance between miracles and spells. Radagon's fundamentalist prayers are a result of both intelligence and faith, neither spell nor miracle, but both. The foundational laws of the Golden Order fundamentalist further espouse these ideas, that all things are in fact linked, not in opposition, and to quote the law of regression is the pool of meaning, that all things yearn eternally to converge. I hadn't realised the full significance of these words until I began to consider Elden Ring's systems of duality. As it stands now, the world is one of opposing forces acting upon each other, creating a Newtonian system of balance. And yet sometimes the balance slips. The removal of the Rune of Death, for example, which leads the world in a deathless state. But ultimately, things eventually do rebalance. We later have the Night of the Black Knives, and the birth of those who live in death, as if to correct the imbalance that had been caused by the removal of the Rune of Death. But balance between opposing forces can be destructive sometimes, and perhaps Radagon witnessing these events around death seeks now to completely eliminate balance altogether. Instead of it being a yin and yang circle, two halves acting against each other, it is just a circle. Devon and Darian, Dee and his brother, represent a culmination of Golden Order ideals. Two beings, yet one soul. Convergence. Their armor and weapons are gold and silver combined, reminding us that their condition is symbolic of the greater themes of duality found within Elden Ring. We've already talked about gold and silver, and its relevance to yin and yang, to mercury and sulfur. And yet here we have two beings with one soul, and their armor sets showing these two materials, these two halves, as one. Their weapon, the inseparable sword,
Yeah, and as Smotown is saying, I do think balance is really important in Elden Ring, and when you have too much of one or the other, you become imbalanced and your kind of existence gets diluted when you have too much gold or too much silver. And the two examples that I'll use to kind of justify this statement are that those who partake in Dragon Communion and consume the hearts of dragons are essentially also consuming gravelstone scales, which is really lovely for the teeth. But anyway, they have gold within them, and so when somebody consumes all this gold, eventually the yearning within them will eventually snap and cause them to transform into something human, and it is ruinous, and they kind of lose all sense of reason and rationale, it seems, according to somebody like Yura. And conversely, when we have somebody like Bach and we give them a larval silver tier to be reborn, it seems as though you're infusing more silver into the system and they end up becoming catatonic and falling over and dying. The Albinorks can't seem to reproduce naturally, and I wonder if part of the reason for that is because they lack gold and the will and the drive to do it. But more specifically, gold might be what's used to anchor the spirit into the lands between, perhaps. I don't exactly know, because like there's weird stuff with like glintstone to consider, and like glintstone's adjacency to silver and all that. But anyway, part of the reason why I wonder that is because the land octopi ovaries state that they need human blood to reproduce, and I wonder if the reason for that is because human blood has more gold in it. Which I guess like maybe the gold isn't exactly the answer, because couldn't they just eat enough beasts? Maybe not. Maybe there is something like if a land octopus eats a human, they also like eat their soul, and therefore like they put their soul in the egg. Maybe that's something I should consider as well. But yeah, it's really rough. But anyway, like land octopi are considered like bloodless enemies, and the fact that they need human blood specifically does seem more likely to me that it should be gold related, because the bloodless type enemies that you can summon as spirit ashes all require HP to be summoned as opposed to FP, and I associate HP and blood more strongly with gold than I do silver. So that's just kind of my thoughts in a nutshell there. Drunk Mage says, if omens don't return to the tree when they die, wouldn't this imply that even before the lands between got to its current state of disrepair, omens never died properly and kept coming back? So I don't think you could say that they kept coming back as much as it is like they became cursed. And so the whole issue with the omens and death in general is we don't exactly know when death was first removed in the lands between. Many people believe death got removed from the order upon Marika and Godfrey's ascension to power, whereas I do think it's more likely that death may have been removed after Radigan ascended to power, and that in and of itself raises a lot of contrasting points, in that if death was removed when omens like were first around and whatnot, then I'm kind of struggling to like get my thoughts in line with this, but it just becomes a bigger issue later on, trying to reconcile some of these differences. And this isn't to say like one train of thought is inherently better than the other. It's just arguable. me and my weird land octopi theories and golden blood conspiracy theories, they pan out. They pan out. Outside the lands between, people die with a problem, without problem, or with problem. This damn heart. Oh, I know why it's back. It's because I refreshed the chat. I hate this stupid thing. Oh no, El Degusto is just vague. Okay. Alright, so going back to the video. Hey Chubby Owl, nice to see you again.
Reads the following. Sword forged by compounding silver and gold. The inseparable twins found solace in the Golden Order, the only institution not to revile them as accursed beings. To the Golden Order, these twins are a step towards greater convergence, the removal of balance, and oneness within the world. I have seen people try to liken the fundamentalist ideology to be similar to the Frenzied Flame and the return to the One Great. And I would argue that the real difference between these two is that the Golden Order fundamentalists don't necessarily want all life to be bundled into one form, rather that there is a uniformity amongst life, and that everything is linked together in a chain of causality. As we've discussed numerous times in different videos, the law of regression makes one think of the statistical phenomena known as regression towards the mean. In essence, this refers to the idea where a sampling of variables where there are extreme outliers, if you repeat that same sampling, the results will regress closer towards the mean, towards the average. Last Protagonist describes this very
I know that
aptly
guy.
in his Great Tree video, in which he uses the example of two parents who are above average height. If they have a child together, that child is likely to be shorter than them and closer to the average height. So the law of regression, in the context of Elden Ring, most likely means that life in general, that eternally yearns to converge, will, over time, regress closer and closer to an average, again implying some sort of uniformity of form. Combining
And this might be one way that Radigan's age kind of strayed away from that of the Crucible, where everything was being blended together indiscriminately, whereas this is kind of restructuring and reordering things to be perhaps more civilized. I don't exactly know how that works. I don't know how strongly I still believe in the whole regression of the mean idea. It's just kind of an idea that I had as I was looking into the concept. So take it or leave it.
this understanding with the great themes of duality and balance within Elden Ring, we can see the Golden Order fundamentalist ideas as a transcendence to something beyond opposing forces, something that is complete, much like Radigan strived to be, and much like the true magnum opus of alchemy, the combination and reconciliation of all matter. The striving towards wholeness or completeness is also Jungian, in which a person attains wholeness by reconciling the different aspects of themselves, the ego with shadow, the anima and the animus. Except in Radigan's case, this reconciliation of both of his halves is more literal, as he does indeed share his body with his other half, with his shadow. And perhaps this gives new meaning to Marika's last words to her other half.
O Radigan, leal hound of the Golden Order, thou art yet to become me. Thou art yet to become a god. Let us be shattered, both. Mine other self.
Perhaps Radigan wanted Marika and Radigan to become one being. Despite the fact they share a body, they are still distinct personalities. They are still the two materials of alchemy, as ultimately he is just one half of a whole. Yet Radigan's fundamentalist ideology, his desire for convergence, is flawed. There are things that exist outside the holistic Golden Order, such as those who live in death, and the Omen, and the Albinaurics. These cannot be reconciled. They can only be expunged. Dee even acknowledges that these beings, those who live in death, tarnish the truth of the Golden Order just by their mere existence, as they fall outside the principles and causality of Golden Order fundamentalism. They are like the remainder in a mathematic equation that doesn't quite balance. So at a very base level, this philosophy is flawed. If everything is not connected in a chain of causality, then all things do not yearn to converge. It's that simple. Those who live in death and the Omen curse will continue to exist outside those chains of causality. However, they do work in a system of balance as they act as opposing forces to the Erdtree and those who are connected to it. The world of Elden Ring either needs to exist in a state of balance, or it needs to be completely melted away to become one material once again. And I want to move on to the final pair of twins who I believe are the best example of harmonious balance that we can find in Elden Ring, the twin prodigies. Miquella and Malenia are born of the single-bodied god, and as we learn from Malenia's remembrance, this fact was supposed to make their birth the most special of all. And perhaps Radagon had hoped that they would not be born as twins, for in a lot of ways the white-haired Miquella and the red-haired Malenia, together, are the greatest force of all. And yet they were born as twins, reflecting that parity and duality that exists throughout Elden Ring. Again, one lunar and one solar. One with white hair, one with red hair. One physical...
And it is kind of interesting to me that Miquella has blonde hair, essentially, or like platinum blonde hair, when all of the other children of Radagon are redheads, specifically. Although, apparently that's a bit of a contentious topic with the point of Rykard. Apparently many people believe him to be blonde, although with the Gelmir Knight set talking about the feather in the cap, and calling it Marco Polo, it does lead me to believe that he was probably also red of hair.
Aggressive and powerful, the other passive, reflective and intelligent. I have always believed that St. Trina is an aspect or part of Miquella, and perhaps that is reflective of the fact that he aligns more closely with the feminine aspect of yin and yang. As we learn from the triple rings of light, Radagon hoped to utilise his son's intelligence for his Golden Order fundamentalism, as Miquella is obviously a great thinker. Yet Miquella rejects the teachings of convergence, as he only cares about one thing, his sister, and to cure her to make her life better. In fact, most of what we know about Miquella's life is dedicated to curing his sister. In return, Malenia rewards her brother's love with undying loyalty. Despite herself being an Empyrean, and one of the most powerful beings in all of the lands between, she resigns herself to be her brother's blade. While he sought a way to eliminate her curse, Malenia would shield her brother from his. Miquella, the ever-youthful, was no doubt physically feeble, and yet he now had his sister's strong arm to defend him. Mohg and Morgott's relationship was one of contrasting and opposing forces, an antagonistic relationship, at least in an ideological sense rather than a physical sense, and it was meant to better emphasise the Omen condition and the flaws of the Golden Order. Yet Miquella and Malenia actually represent the pinnacle of opposing forces in balance, because they aren't really opposing, they are symbiotic and harmonious, yet individual. In fact, the statues of Miquella and Malenia highlight their powerful bond. But not only this, it shows two beings, two halves, making up one whole. Contradictory yet cooperative, they are together a singular cosmic power that could bring balance. And together their strength disproves the need for convergence that the Golden Order fundamentalists strive for. They value the individuality of two opposing halves, and are the poster children for disparity and individuality. It is just a shame that Miquella's order was never given a chance to grow, snuffed out by Mohg. Indeed, it is the fickleness of gods, no better than man, that is the fly in the ointment. But
yeah, I don't necessarily know about the Miquella and disparity thing, just because we don't entirely know Miquella's plans with relation to the Halig tree and everything that would have gone in Miquella's supposed order. Obviously, we do have some stuff in the cut content, but it kind of feels to me that the cut Miquellan stuff is intended to be cut, because they wanted to move away from some of those concepts, unfortunately. And I wouldn't be surprised if we do get some elaboration in the DLC, but I also wouldn't be surprised if we got nothing. And then Eldiusto had a good question in that, could Ranni have been born only of Rennala, and maybe they used magic to create a child through parthenogenesis, unless she is a one-parent Empyrean? I don't necessarily think so, partially because she was chosen by the Two Fingers, although I guess if, like, Renala wasn't necessarily a god, she might have needed the fingers to be chosen. I tend to think there's more reason to believe that Ranni was the child of Radagon than not, just because I feel like you become, like, you have a lot more difficulties explaining everything else in relation to the demigods if Renala was birthing children without Radagon / Marika. But yeah, technically there might be room for it. I know we were discussing this in the Discord, I think over the weekend or something like that, and there's a lot of reasons to be like against it, but I don't think there's anything that explicitly prohibits it. Maybe I'm just kind of misremembering off the top of my head, though. Elden Enthusiast says, the only abundant stuff left for Miquella is more visual and speculative now than in the final version of the game, in your opinion. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel as well, especially with the whole decay aspect of Millennia kind of being diminished, I guess we could say. Like, yeah. Alright, I'll just leave it there.
Regardless of the actions of God and men, there will always be a shadow, and in the world of Elden Ring, I think it holds true that for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction, and that is why the world of Elden Ring is one of dualities, reflections, and shadows. So thanks guys, that is my take on duality and twins within Elden Ring. I know this was a little different than my usual Elden Ring videos, but I've been thinking deeply about the concepts of duality recently, and how it manifests as almost a background noise to all of Elden Ring's great events. But please let me know your thoughts below. What do you think about the themes of parity, duality, and twins within Elden Ring? And if you liked this video, please leave a like, consider subscribing, and comment below, as it really helps the channel out immensely. But until next time guys, I will see you in the streets of Leyndell. Take care, and have a wonderful evening.
Alright, I thought that was another good video by Smotown. Oh, this one's only 3 weeks ago. Okay, so this is a lot more recent than I was expecting. So I am curious to hear what Smo thinks in relation to duality that characters like Creary and Arena / Hyetta have. Because even though they're not like literal twins, perhaps, there is the kind of concept of disparity and duality and twinship, for lack of a better term, that goes along with them, which I feel weren't really explored in this video. Not that I blame him, just because they're kind of like disparate from the other forms of twinship that we have in the game, but I do think they're kind of interesting and worth consideration within the broader confines of the game here. Millennia equals mutation and change. Miquella equals stasis and sleep. Yeah. Drew Wang's interpretation of the born of a single god line was that being an Empyrean was sort of genetically inherited, and if both of your parents were gods, you were essentially guaranteed to get it. I think for that line in particular, you are correct with Miquella and Millennia, and I feel like that makes them outliers in terms of them being Empyreans. But, all of the other Empyreans may have been chosen or selected by the Two Fingers. Could the demigod's hair color be symbolic of being subservient to others' wills? You heard something you forgot where, about the different colors of gold being a corruption of pure gold and will. Yeah, the whole gold and will thing is kind of hard to reconcile because we have what's called primordial gold in like the dragon's red lightning, which would imply that we have a non-primordial gold with the yellow lightning of the current day dragon communion stuff. And then we have things affiliated with unalloyed gold with Miquella, which does seem to be distinct from the dragon's gold in both like the red and yellow lightning forms. So if there is an unalloyed gold, that should imply that other forms of gold are alloyed and then therefore impure or corrupted. Maybe corrupted is a bit too strong of a word there, but yeah. My general train of thought is that if dragons are affiliated with life, then that which corrupts gold may be life itself, and that unalloyed gold may not actually have life within it, perhaps, because it keeps things stable. And with Miquella's unalloyed gold needle being able to like house the will potentially of Melania and or Millicent, it does lead me to believe that unalloyed gold should be more closely affiliated with willpower, and willpower might be almost completely overlapping with bodily life on the Venn diagram of what gold is, but there is that slight difference, I think, where gold shouldn't be intrinsically related to life, because the unalloyed gold Miquella Lily is kind of wilted and faded, whereas that is a little bit counterintuitive to me, because if something was gold, it should be infused. Well, if something gold was infused with life, then I feel like the Miquella's lilies kind of directly contradict that a little bit. Even though they're like not dead, they're not quite as alive as I would have expected. El Degusto thinks unalloyed gold means it's so pure it's not tainted by the will of beings such as the greater will or outer gods. But yeah, even that, I mean, that version of purity, I think, just extends to willpower in general. And Drunk Mage thinks Miquella having gold hair shows his will being his own. So if Miquella has gold hair and his will is his own, that would imply that Marika also has gold hair and therefore her will is her own. But you might be onto something there, because Melina kind of has like pinkish hair while she doesn't have her eye open. But once her eye does become opened and whatnot, and Destined Death is released, I guess, the remnants of it at least, her hair does turn black and she seems to have more of a will of her own, but her hair obviously isn't gold. And pure gold doesn't tarnish, whatever that means. That part is questionable because of stuff relating to like somber smithing stones and all of that. Maybe pure gold is tarnished. It's really up for debate, because if something is tarnished, maybe it's lost its red coloration, its red hue, because like death is removed. And so when we look at the unalloyed gold needles, they don't really have red in them. Although like Loretta's gem is reddish in game, but her concept art is yellow, and like all the other unalloyed gold stuff is more of a pale yellow than like an orange or a reddish hue. All right. So that'll be it for Smotown. Now we'll just finish off with another small video by the Lore Hunter, which says, Elden Ring is full of crap. He told me this video actually came out before the game got released, so this is going to be kind of funny. I'm assuming it's about gold-tinged excrement and or the bloody excrement. I don't remember what it's actually called, but let's go ahead and see what this is all about. Hey Zelda here, welcome into the stream. So yes, tarnishing is the losing of luster, a darkening in English, and the term tarnished may have come from English, but at least for the Japanese for it, if you excuse me whistling out of my teeth, is to be more along the lines of faded or to lose color in general, not necessarily to darken color. Here we go. Elden Ring is full of crap by the Lore Hunter.
Why, hello there. It is 1 day and 20 hours until Elden Ring releases on PC in my time zone EST, and this is the Elden Wait countdown. By the way, if you're on console, it's just 6 hours later than that, and if you were wondering how I know this, refer to yesterday's video, because I lay out the time zones and the tweet from the Elden Ring account that has a graphic showing when the game is releasing in each time zone. And we are at the end of the item description countdown, talking about item descriptions from the closed network test. Today is the final item description, and that is because I can finally say that I've been playing Elden Ring, and I am going to be doing a review for my video tomorrow, and then after that we are doing the finale, which I have to work on the details for, but keep an eye out on that. I'm hoping to do a live finale in the final hours before Elden Ring drops on PC, at least in my time zone, and I want to do something a little special for that. So look forward to that, but today is the final item description from the closed network test. It is the end of something and the beginning of something really exciting. And there was only one way I could end this whole thing, and that is with the gold-tinged excrement item description. It says, someone's excrement, it has a golden tinge. Material used for crafting items, often hidden in woods and thickets. Gold-tinged excrement is a highly stable substance. It doesn't dry out, nor does it lose its customary warmth or scent. For better or for worse, it remains as it is. And in my ranking video, I gave that the Someone Really Wrote This award, and it is a very funny description. It is very weird. It is gold-tinged excrement, and it just stays the way it is seemingly forever. It doesn't dry out, it doesn't lose its scent even. And it stays warm. So that's weird, and is very funny to read in an item description, and doesn't necessarily, tell us too much about the world, but at the same time it tells us way too much about the world. And there you have it.
Kind of right, that it doesn't tell us too much and also too much. And the reason why I say that gold-tinged excrement might be like one of the most, if not the most important lore items in the game is that it is like the explicit confirmation that there is the equivalent of a kind of stasis going on in the lands between, partially due to the blessing or the grace of gold, and that it keeps something in a highly stable form. It doesn't dry out, doesn't lose its warmth or scent. It remains as it is for better or for worse, which I think becomes instrumental in helping explain why the commoners are the way that they are, like the noblemen, like they're the pitiful product of unending life. It's because the gold is keeping them alive, because destined death has been removed. So, of course, if destined death being removed keeps things stabilized, what would happen to poop if destined death were reintegrated back into the system? Who knows? Maybe it would be able to fully decompose and lose a bit of its customary warmth. So, yeah, those are just kind of my unhinged, gold-tinged theories there.
It remains as it is. And in my ranking video, I gave it stays warm. Item description. Same time, Elden Weight countdown item descriptions are done, which is wild. I feel like just yesterday I was at day 95 when I started doing these item descriptions, but we have come to the end of it, and it is the beginning of a new era where we are all going to be talking about and playing Elden Ring after waiting years for it to happen, and the next 2 videos leading up to release will be very exciting. Well, I guess it's one video, which is going to be my review of Elden Ring, which will probably be in progress unless something amazing happens, and then also the finale leading up to the launch of Elden Ring for everybody, at least in my time zone. It's pretty much an international release when it comes to PC, so look forward to that. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like, and if you want more Elden Ring content, please consider subscribing to The Lore Hunter. Thanks for watching.
Alright, so that was the video. It's kind of interesting that he had done this series before the game had released, but probably just like relying on the network test item descriptions. So it looks like Golden Poo remained, for better or worse, just as it was. Golden poo equals the best energy source, never loses its warmth. That's kind of an interesting thought when you say it that way, yeah. Wasn't there a poop item in Bloodborne 2? I guess technically if you wanted to describe beast pellets as beast poop, yeah, you could definitely say that. But there's definitely poop in Dark Souls, the Dark Souls trilogy. Maybe not in Dark Souls 2. I don't remember if there's poop in that one. Definitely 1 and 3. And 3 also gives the added benefit of having some soiled trousers. So, extra poop for your lore diving pleasure. Alright, everybody. So those are the videos that we watched tonight. Thank you all so much for joining me. We will be going live again tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Probably for the last time for a little while, because I want to go back into creating more content. Because like after looking at all of these videos, there are some topics that I want to touch on and like make my own dedicated videos for, which other people may have touched on incidentally, but maybe not in quite the amount of depth that I would have liked. So, yeah. Tomorrow will probably be the last stream for a little bit, and hopefully you'll join me then again. 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. Till then, I hope you guys stay safe, take care. Last Protagonist out.